The Yubara Empire, shrouded in legend, was created at the intersection of powerful energy flows, what common people called places of power. Having received power from the spirit of the sun, Millenio ignited the sun, and the magic caster Frid summoned the spirit of darkness and created the night. If the first gave life force, then Frid gave peace, and when Millenio illuminated the world with warm advice, Frid cast a shadow over the world where one could hide from the heat of the light. The world called the Yubara Empire was created by their hands, the current Millenio imperial family, as well as the liberated archdukes, who were the only ones in the empire who could control the spirits. The protagonist, a young girl with blonde hair, was looking through a book in the silence of her office, reading about how the empire was created. Princess Dorothy Millenio of the Yubara Empire became interested in the history of the empire's creation. The child called Dorothy by her name, but she was so busy reading that she barely heard him. His voice, annoying like the buzzing of a fly, constantly circled around her, preventing her from immersing herself in the world of the book. Dorothy tried to ignore him, clutching the spine of the novel against her chest like a shield, and looking down even further. A young knight named Ray was always making noise nearby. Dorothy considered him pathetic. He was constantly lurking around her, the prince of the empire and her unbearable older brother. Dorothy slowly lifted her head, her eyes, usually dreamy, now shining with disgust. To be more precise, in the future she and Raymond were connected by an unusual story that could not end happily. Raymond is the true heir, since he died at the hands of his own sister, and his fate was decided long ago. Her second life had begun, the last chance that had been given to her, she who had lived her past life in tyranny, and the second time would not repeat the same regrets. And the purpose of this life was as follows: to live kindly. Dorothy learned a lesson from her past life. Good deeds are rewarded with happiness, bad ones with misfortune. Back then she was evil. She killed the crown prince, she seized the imperial throne, and destroyed everyone who was objectionable to her. However, when she got everything, a terrible end awaited her. The one she loved hated her and chose death. The people with whom she shared power strangled her with it, pointed their fingers at her, and called her a tyrant. Their anger burned Dorothy's palace and led her to her death, but she had learned enough from this life lesson, and then she gladly accepted her death. The protagonist, Dorothy Millenio, who held the entire empire in fear, found a second life, and her birth now marked kindness. Perhaps this was the life lesson that finally allowed her to start living correctly. The opportunity to turn back a life full of evil, the murder of Ray, and the seizing of the throne. This is the true birth of the tyrant Dorothy and the beginning of all regrets. So she could not kill him again. She could not hate him, and whatever he did, she was destined to endure it. Ray simply adored his little sister, small and sweet, incredibly intelligent, and constantly called her a true genius. Dorothy had long since realized that she had never truly loved her brother, and she couldn't even answer the question of why. His head was full of flowers and butterflies. The boy never considered himself intelligent, and he didn't even know the history of the empire's birth. He received more during his life than she did, simply because he had already been born as the crown prince. Today he wanted to play with her. He played like a nobody, but Dorothy refused and suggested the child play alone. The nanny approached and warned that His Highness the Prince was not allowed to distract the young princess during her studies. She was surprised that the young girl was reading the history of Yubara and talking about the spirit stone that belonged to the first emperor, and that it was lost during the time of Teresia. Dorothy was sure that the spirit of light stone had disappeared during the time of the carriage, and there was a difference of almost 100 years between Kors and Teresia. The nanny was surprised. It was really true, and the princess had really learned everything about the Millenio family, and how could she be so intelligent at such a young age? It seems the heroine had to pretend she didn't know this, so she could adapt to her young age. The nanny exclaimed with admiration. His Majesty the Emperor simply had to hear about her knowledge. The princess warned the nanny not to tell him this under any circumstances, and that now was not the best time. She asked for nothing to be said to the emperor, and was sure that it was not necessary. Emperor Karnan Millenio, a young man of aristocratic blood, in other words. He was her father. To her, the word father sounded like something distant, like a foreign language. Although she had a rough idea of how it could be translated, the girl never felt the sincere intonation of this word, and could not convey its clear feeling. Of course, they were connected by blood, but for her, it had no meaning. For some unknown reason, she couldn't even inherit the right to Millenio. Her mother, Empress Alice, died immediately after her daughter's birth. Her father was indifferent towards her. The children were born at the expense of his beloved wife's life. Previously, she tried everything she could to get him to notice her. Once she fell right in front of his eyes, demonstrating her intelligence. Dorothy tried her best to get her father's attention so she could surpass Ray. But unfortunately, she was unsuccessful. The Emperor never paid attention to her, as if she were a pathetic empty space in his life. Until the end of her life, he didn't even look at her, and this was the deepest trauma for her daughter. But with her brother, it was different. He didn't have to do anything to receive gifts from his father and have dinner together. He could ask endless questions and just smile, but why did his father love him more, when the only thing he could do was smile stupidly and play in the sandbox? Why didn't he even look at his daughter, even though she tried much harder? That's why she couldn't stand that unbearable boy. Her father never chose his daughter, and a heartbreaking anger settled in the little girl's heart. In her past life, she could only find peace when she taught this correctly to her brother and took away his favorite things. After one of these pranks, her father ordered the girl to be locked in her room for a whole month and not let her go anywhere. And the further it went, the more their relationship with Karnan resembled a diabolical vicious circle. Dorothy passionately desired love, but her life was too useless for it. It was as if she wanted to reach the beautiful moon with her hands, but her love remained one-sided. And it only reached my father. So the seeds of evil were fed with anger and guilt. They sprouted. Dorothy became jealous and envious. The girl went over heads and took lives to quench her thirst. And so the displeasure for his daughter gave birth to the tyrant Dorothy Millenio. For her, fear was more than a tool, a confirmation of victory, a proof that she had finally obtained the power that she had so lacked as a child. Now it didn't matter what the reasons were. Now Dorothy realized that it was useless to transfer one's own sins onto others. It was just that her only flaw was not having evoked enough love in her own father. She no longer felt any remorse. On the contrary, it wasn't bad to live like this, without seeing a single shadow, and it would be more convenient. Since she wanted to become kind, the nanny felt a little sad, and she really wanted the emperor to also be happy to see his little princess. It was a beautiful sunny day. The ladies went out into the flowery garden, and today the nanny suggested a walk in a different direction. She pointed to a beautiful garden and invited the young princess to relax a bit on such a wonderful day. Dorothy looked into the distance with bated breath, and it was in that place where Alice's homeland was located. The garden was created by the emperor for his wife, Alice, who missed her home very much. And Dorothy also went there often before her rebirth, but she hadn't visited it for a long time. It is not clear why the nanny decided to go there today, but today the pleasant walk was not meant to come true. The emperor appeared nearby. Here unexpectedly appeared a tall knight with a snow-white vest and golden embroidery, accompanied by his assistant. Upon seeing the young princess, a certain hatred and discontent appeared in his eyes, and it could really be that she had already managed to commit a stupid act, no worse than her brother. She was rude and made some mistake, or she should have said something. But the emperor suddenly asked who they were to dare to enter Alice's garden. It is true that one could not expect anything else from him. One day, he would approach his daughter with a friendly smile, but now the heroine was going to live this life sweetly. The nanny replied to the emperor that this was Princess Dorothy Millenio, and he was as surprised as if he were seeing that girl for the first time. Karnan muttered something under his breath. The young princess stared at her father's cold gaze and waited to see what he would do this time. The emperor was indignant. The young girl couldn't even pay to greet him properly, and no one had taught her this. The girl didn't even have parents to educate her, but the nanny assured him that the princess was very intelligent and exceptional and probably just surprised when she met the emperor for the first time. During etiquette classes at the palace, the girl showed exceptional knowledge, and making a gentle bow, she greeted His Majesty the Emperor. The young man asked how old the young princess would be this year. She would be 8 years old. He asked her what was so exceptional about her, but Dorothy thought it was just her nanny's exaggeration, and that there was nothing special about her. The nanny admitted that the princess already knew the entire imperial genealogy, and that she was modest and insightful beyond her age. The nanny was no help to her, and the emperor, upon approaching, was surprised to discover that she had really learned the entire family tree. Karnan stared at the young girl and asked her to tell him everything in great detail to ensure her knowledge. But Dorothy thought that the emperor already knew the palace genealogy, and that there was really something in her that he didn't know. She really thought about testing the emperor, and Dorothy replied to him that what was the point of telling him the whole family tree? The nanny seemed to be in a den of wild animals, where a ferocious lion was attacking a young lioness who was resisting the emperor's order. Dorothy admitted that she was simply trying to save His Majesty time, because he was so busy that he had never seen her since her birth. There is no point in wasting time with her or him, and even if the whole genealogy were told here, it would be of no use. The young man replied dryly. The nanny's words were true, and in that case, if Dorothy had something to say, and she really wanted to do it, then it would be better if she said it right now. In her memory, the emperor had never said anything like that before. The girl, she couldn't even imagine why, or what she should say now. Before her rebirth, she would have jumped for joy, but unfortunately, now she didn't need anything from her father. But she couldn't stay silent, and asked him to prepare the best wine under his name. The emperor was surprised at what the nurse had taught the girl, and whether it was really appropriate for a young princess of that age to speak like that. The nanny really never told the princess about alcohol, or at least she admitted she read about it in a book called Portrait of Babe Loa. There is a scene where the main character and his beloved drink vintage wine, described by the author as something very refined. So, out of curiosity, the princess wanted to try a good wine at least once in her life. And the emperor couldn't believe that the young girl had read such a difficult novel. The young man replied thoughtfully that if she wanted a good wine that carried his name, they would prepare it, but if she made a single mistake, even just once, the nanny would face the death penalty. She may have inherited her tyrant nature from her father, but she still decided to be kind, and she needed to save the kind nanny. After this incident, the nanny hoped that the emperor would be interested, but he did not visit her again. She tried to reassure her, but he couldn't come because he was very busy. The nurse was getting angry every time, and frankly, the princess could only be grateful for that. Her mood worsens every time she sees her hated father, and for a prosperous life, it is better to avoid sources of bad mood. In her past life, Dorothy had strived to show her best side. Now she felt foolish for giving in to useless illusions and getting angry. She realized everything. For her own well-being, it was better to simply do nothing and not stick her nose into her father's affairs. And as soon as she decides to do something, she will awaken his anger and discontent, so she can just stay seated. And it will still be impossible to get rid of her brother. He returned again to visit his dear sister, and taking the book, Dorothy asked the nanny to tell him that she hadn't seen her for a long time, and that she wasn't there. Ray told the nanny, in a cheerful voice, that he wanted to show his sister how to handle the spirit of the council, but he was really just trying to make fun of her. It is said that the spirit of light is a blessing that is only available to the Millennium family. But this is just an old fairy tale. The power of the Millennium family, which once lit the sun, has weakened completely, and now it can be used to light other large lights. Over time, the Millennium family began to produce those who were completely unable to control the spirits. Like Dorothy, the princess who cannot summon any spirit, the little Dorothy, who was completely excluded by this tradition. Another reason appeared why neither the people nor her father loved her, so she decided to go against the gods, and hated Ray even more. What is the use of this pitiful spirit of the north? This tiny firefly that has retained its influence only thanks to a thread of history. She took this influence from him, ascended the throne with her own strength, and put an end to the era of legends, proclaiming the era of the people, raising a bloody sword to the sky. Everything turned out to be a failure. The princess was executed, branded a tyrant. Perhaps the spirits really determined the future emperor, and her ignominious end turned out to be a punishment. Dorothy hid and waited for her brother to finally leave, and the child confessed that a friend had come to see him, and he wanted to introduce them. It was probably someone Ray's age who made no less noise, and Dorothy decided to leave her brother with the nurse and get some sleep herself. She decided to turn around in one place so she could quietly get away from her brother, get to her room and not get caught. The little Dorothy, lost in her thoughts, didn't notice the dark-haired boy walking towards her. Their collision was as inevitable as the change of seasons, and she crashed into him so hard that she fell onto the lawn. His voice was soft and worried as he bent down and asked if the young girl was hurt. Dorothy looked at him, and there was surprise in her eyes. It was impossible, that face. She had seen it before. The man she loved more than anyone in the world before being reborn, the the same shade of dark hair, the same glint in his eyes when they looked at her with such care. The man who hated her more than his own life, who took a desperate step and hanged himself in the palace at sunset. She couldn't forget him, his love, his breath. This man was eternity for her. Now he was again in front of her, a little boy with worried scarlet eyes, that in her past life had looked at her with love and hate. From the first day of her return, Dorothy didn't forget him for a second, and with tears in her eyes, she pronounced his name. A memory of another time, of another life, there, under another sky. He was also there. The child apologized profusely to the young princess and tried to find out if she was crying from sharp pain. The cute dress was very dirty. The young knight felt guilty for not being attentive enough and asked to bring his snow-white handkerchief. He was worried that she might have twisted her ankle and now couldn't even walk. But that wasn't the reason Dorothy was crying now. She was thinking about who it would be better to call for help. The princess admitted that she really wanted to see him. But these words sounded too strange because the boy was seeing her for the first time. It turns out he heard everything correctly, and this beautiful young girl really knows who he is and what his name is. He was the man whose warmth she remembered for so many years, without even understanding where she got it from. Dorothy's heart began to beat faster, skipping a beat. Theon knelt in front of her, carefully drying her tears, and asked her to stop crying so that her beautiful eyes wouldn't swell. The one who once walked away and abandoned her was now by her side, so beautiful and alive again. It wasn't a magical dream. Maybe he is alive, which means that Dorothy already fulfilled her duty in this life, the one that could very well be the reason for her rebirth. Ray finally found his little sister and asked her fearfully if she was hurt, and if everything was okay, and most importantly, what happened here. Dorothy told her little brother not to worry, because nothing terrible had happened, and it was just a small bruise. The boy saw Theon and began to yell loudly, wondering if his beloved sister was really crying because of this fool. The boy was incredibly worried and admitted that maybe she was crying because of him, because if it wasn't for him, she wouldn't have tripped and fallen. Ray grabbed him by the shoulders and believed they could become good friends, and his sister had never cried so bitterly for anyone. And what did he do to his dear little sister that she can't stop crying? Dorothy decided to separate the children. She asked her brother to stop and said angrily that she hadn't started crying because of Theon, and that something had simply gotten into her eye. A speck of dust got in, her eye started to hurt, tears began to flow, and her brother kept worrying about whether everything was okay with her now. The girl didn't think the day would come when she would think with gratitude about how silly Ray was, and it was evident that he was very worried about the wound on her knee. Theon couldn't believe why she was covering up his rudeness in front of her brother. It wasn't possible that she had met him before, and he tried to understand what expression was on her face and how she knew his name. She managed to quickly smooth over the situation, and the boys just had to work everything out between themselves. Ray admitted that he had misunderstood everything and sincerely asked for forgiveness, but that in reality, his friend was to blame. It was a perfect opportunity to introduce the boy properly, and with a hand on his friend's shoulder, Ray introduced Dorothy to Theon. The young knight bowed and apologized for his rudeness in their first encounter. He kissed her hand tenderly and told her his name, Theon Fried. His eyes, he saw something in them that he couldn't understand, but that left him paralyzed. True, this was her new beginning. There was no history between them, and if the princess could forget her thirst for love and free herself from the shackles of the failures of past days, if her love is something more for this boy, maybe in this life he will finally look at her. Maybe everything will be different again. And today the young knight didn't come alone. The princess heard a child's voice beside her. This voice belonged to an unusual girl. She was Theon's first and last love, a baby with pink hair and happy eyes, named Julia de Levigny. Due to the agreement between the families and Dorothy's stubbornness, she had no choice but to marry her. But until his death, he only loved Julia. The two had been close since childhood and shared great affection. Their relationship was special, like two puzzles that fit perfectly together. Between them, there was no room for another person, and in the end, the protagonist's life was exactly like that. Dorothy yearned for her father's love, but she couldn't get it. She yearned for Theon's love, but he didn't give it to her either. A life not worthy of love. Even after the marriage, on the way she always looked for Julia and sent her letters tirelessly. The dozens of letters that he and Julia exchanged daily all happened behind her back, full of an expectant expression that he had never shown her, and trying by all means to hide himself. and his true feelings. After the wedding, Dorothy prayed every day that one day, suddenly, Julia would disappear from her life. It would be even better if she died, and could no longer be with the man she loved more than anyone in the world. When a loyal servant with a solid track record brought the unexpected news of Lady Julia's death, Dorothy was very happy. She comforted herself with the illusion that now finally, her beloved Theon would pay attention to her. And they could be happy. She broke free from his embrace, although he had to choose death, and went to where his only beloved was. Julia, her death was due solely to Dorothy's greed, and she desperately believed that her selfish love had killed him. And it could be called love. The sensation in her chest, as if it were tearing apart, she felt it again when she saw Theon next to this girl. The children were talking and laughing, and the girl who had arrived with Theon from the Duchy of Phrygia politely greeted the princess. They were together even in this life, and surely in the past, Dorothy was filled with that terrible feeling. And now it was completely wrapping around her. She warned that she was going to her room, as she had no desire to play with them. The brother noticed his sister's strange behavior, and he didn't understand why she suddenly behaved like that. The prince who died in her arms, the man she loved and who chose death to get rid of her, and to never be close to her again, and his innocently executed lover, whom he will love until the last moment of his life. Completely desperate, Dorothy ran forward, realizing that even there, in her new life, there was still no room for her. She wrapped herself in a blanket in her room, confessing to the nanny that she didn't want anything at all, and that she was simply tired, with no desire to talk to anyone. Everything she saw, everything she felt, only intensified her longing for something lost, for something that she still couldn't fully comprehend. Just like in her past life, she felt that void that consumed her completely, that unbearable weight of loneliness that squeezed her heart, and didn't allow her to breathe. It seemed as if the whole world revolved around them, Theon and those he loved. And she was just a shadow, a ghost, condemned to wander forever on the outskirts of their existence. Dorothy read the book in silence, trying to escape from reality, which seemed especially disturbing today. She just wanted everything to end quickly, for that day to pass and for life to return to its usual course, although full of the same silence and the same books. Ray, her brother, was making noise again somewhere nearby, now at one end of the vast palace, now at the other. He was worried. Today was an important day that would change his life forever. Today, he would officially become the crown prince. The young knight was to become the crown prince of Ubera. It was a very important role, and this made the child even more scared. Today, he also looked like a silly puppy, and his sister asked him to first do something with his face. Should this fool rule the empire? The boy was sure that he would never have become heir if it weren't for his sister. She certainly didn't tremble and walked proudly through the ceremony, because he always said that she was smarter and more talented than him. She would have been an excellent empress, a noble lady whom the people and the aristocrats would have trusted. Dorothy didn't believe it. She didn't know how to summon spirits, so the role of empress was doomed for her. For Ray, it was carefree simplicity, but for her, it was like poison, and the boy behaved like that because he didn't know anything. But over time, he would understand everything. In the future, he will definitely understand the gravity of words, actions, and deeds thrown carelessly towards other people. Ray asked if his beloved sister could wish him luck even once, because he had never heard nice words from her. She had always been incredibly cold to her brother, and even now she had told him to go to hell. But he only wanted her to hug him at least once. Dorothy just wanted to hide, ignoring all his words, and was not at all in the mood for tenderness. The coronation ceremony is the event where the next successor to the emperor is named, and it can be considered one of the main events of the empire. The heroine hadn't realized this before, but now everything seemed very modest to her, and even the emperor was not as vain as before. His Majesty the Emperor entered, and in Dorothy's childhood, even this event seemed brilliant and luxurious. On this day, the whole empire seemed to be illuminated by the blessed light of the ducal family. But now the young princess stopped experiencing any emotion. She greeted the emperor with an imperturbable expression on her face and saw the family scepter in his hands. This scepter should contain the missing spirit stone, but no one knew the truth about where it was. Just before her execution, Dorothy heard something similar, but she couldn't remember it exactly. And maybe it has nothing to do with her now. The ceremony was announced, and a young knight dressed formally entered the hall with his face beaming with admiration. The boy slowly approached the emperor, holding the family scepter in his hands. And now the initiation ceremony was about to begin. Dorothy really hoped that her brother would remember everything perfectly and not make any mistakes now. She looked at her little sister, who was teaching him the rules and etiquette manners for the initiation ceremony. He was so happy that he couldn't contain his sincere admiration and smiled broadly. For some reason, he put on his silly face again, and Dorothy asked him to look only forward and to walk correctly with a straight and noble posture. He moved his head from side to side in a strange way. For some reason, the spirits flocked to Dorothy, and she needed to control the name. It was a great moment. The child fell to his knees before the emperor. It was impossible to believe that this fool was becoming the crown prince. The emperor placed a gold crown on the child's head, but Dorothy would never make such a mistake. No, she had no right to think such thoughts, but at least it would have been better if a true hero had become emperor this time. To the solemn ceremony, many aristocrats were invited. Everyone congratulated the young knight on his coronation, while everyone praised his wonderful spirit. For the young princess, the name Millenio was always like a terrible curse. The noble ladies, upon seeing the princess, noticed that over time she looked more and more like the late empress. Dorothy always had to resist such situations, and upon hearing these words, the emperor said angrily, the ladies apologized for their bad manners, but the little Dorothy had no choice but to remain silent and accept the situation. She couldn't leave that place, even when she was openly rejected. It was terrible, and every time the emperor and Ray were at the center of any conversation, she wasn't treated better than a candlestick fixed to the wall, but she couldn't go anywhere because she carried that name. Before her rebirth, Dorothy would have stepped into the center and started to show her importance, emphasizing thus how silly she was. The final point had already been set long ago. The young princess didn't want to follow the path of the past, and it turned out that Ray incredibly loved his sister. Now there was no thought in her head any more of trying to eclipse him as she had done before. There was nothing funny about it, and the young princess just wanted this moment to end as soon as possible. This was her brother's place. She couldn't claim it, and even if he treated her well, the problem wouldn't be solved. Dorothy had to be present at this event. Her dark thoughts disappeared instantly as soon as she heard this voice. Painfully familiar, a sweet and pleasant smile on a snow-white face, huge scarlet eyes and coal-black hair. For some reason, Theon was there, even though the princess was sure he would be somewhere near Julia. It could be that he had been watching her all this time, offering the beautiful lady a glass of pomegranate juice. Mr. Raymond was very proud of his sister, of her impartiality, and said that Dorothy was learning all imperial knowledge. However, she didn't consider herself that magnificent and sincerely admitted it to the boy. Smiling mysteriously, he said that perhaps they could meet soon at the best academy of the empire, Epistemia. Epistemia is the best academy in the empire, where only the most outstanding talents are trained, and also a place where descendants of noble families make connections for the future. Here arrived all the descendants of noble families, but unlike Ray, who could easily enter this academy, for Dorothy everything was different. Because she shouldn't eclipse the young crown prince, the lady didn't manage to enter the elite academy. One day she tried to resist. She left the palace and threw a stone towards Epistemia, but the stone broke a window and hit the head of the eldest son of the Duke of Bront. After this incident, Karnan locked her in the castle again, and that was the end of her relationship with the emperor. There is no need to repeat something like that twice, and the young princess long ago gave up any claims. Master, she told Theon that it was unlikely she would be able to enter that academy. The boy didn't understand why, since she was a princess, the daughter of the emperor. Right in front of them was His Highness the Emperor with his son, and Theon understood everything immediately. Raymond was always by his father's side at such events, and the boy noticed that it was not a coincidence that the princess was always on the sidelines. Theon was quite perceptive, so he knew how to remain silent when necessary, and understood exactly what the situation was here. Dorothy didn't want to show herself like that to Theon, and certainly didn't want him to notice how sad she was. It was urgent to change the subject, and smiling, she started telling Theon something. Before she could utter her first words, that high-pitched little voice called the young knight again. It was Lady Julia again, and the princess couldn't understand why she was always lurking somewhere nearby. It was a pity not to have been able to talk to Theon alone again, but nothing could be done. And Julia came to pick him up again. The princess had a great desire to leave that event, to hide in her room, and not open the door to anyone ever again. Before leaving, She had to inform the emperor about it, and shyly, she approached His Majesty to notify him of her departure. The assistant heard the girl's voice and suddenly turned with such force that drops of pomegranate juice rolled down her dress. A full glass was poured onto the dazzling white dress of the young princess, and nothing could hide that scarlet stain. What worried her most was not the dress, but the fact that that was the pomegranate juice Theon had given her. The man, with scared eyes, saw what he had just done and tried to calm the princess, although she remained silent. The emperor realized what was happening here. The young man immediately apologized. It was his big mistake. As usual, he didn't even bother to find out the details, and with a cold voice, he asked the girl to immediately apologize to the honorable knight. The situation attracted the attention of the guests. Everyone was watching intently, as the emperor insistently ordered apologies to be made. Ray saw everything with his own eyes and tried to prove to the emperor that it was his little sister who was the victim. Dorothy didn't want to participate in this. She bowed to the knight and asked the Duke of Bront for forgiveness. She should have apologized to the Duke, since he was a much more important guest than a cardboard princess. But even the Duke understood that it was his mistake. What is difficult about apologizing? The emperor doesn't behave like that for a day or two, and if she takes it all to heart and gets angry, it will only make things worse. It must be taken for granted that the emperor asked Robert's assistant to do something about the princess's clothes. Well, now she has an excuse to leave this event. That is enough to calm her down. Many guests witnessed the stupid situation, and out of the corner of her eye, Dorothy saw Theon and his girlfriend staring at her. He had really seen everything with his own eyes, every little detail of the terrible incident. He clearly saw the clumsy princess, the last to lose her authority, bowing to the man who should be blamed himself. Wishing she could sink into the ground, she prayed that he wouldn't look at her like that. Today it was as if everything was against her. The young princess felt simply terrible. The glass of juice, full of scarlet love, once again spilled with unpleasant emotions, tarnishing her honor and her noble dignity. It was still bearable to endure such an attitude from the emperor and offer apologies, setting aside her pride. A look from Theon made her feel like she was going crazy. It was funny. She knew that he would never love her, and she needed to let him go as soon as possible. A soft knock was heard at the door. It was her brother, and he came because he was worried after the stupid situation. Raymond asked his sister to come out and talk to him, and he was genuinely worried about her. A feeling of anger took hold of Dorothy, and she screamed at her unpleasant brother to leave her alone and return to his home. He categorically refused because behind that door was his little sister, and he was not interested in the reception at all. Ray even suggested that she play some fun game so she wouldn't have to think about what happened anymore. The more he worried about her and tried to support her, the more Dorothy blushed and wished that he would finally open his ears and listen carefully. The door opened in front of the boy's scared face, and his sister shouted that he couldn't just leave because he wasn't interested. And since he is a hereditary principal, he must behave appropriately, stop thinking only about games. He must do this, which is his duty. Never before had he seen her so angry, as his sister screamed angrily. His worries did not interest her at all. The little Dorothy grabbed Ray by the collar, and her scream cut through the air like a razor, demanding him to leave her alone. Her eyes, accustomed to his childish spontaneity, reflected a flame of rage that he had never seen before. While she held him tightly in her small hand, the young Master Theon witnessed the fight between brother and sister. He stood frozen in time, struck by the storm that had broken out in that apparently fragile body. The eyes, usually like two sapphires, shining with pure curiosity, now burned with the fire of anger, like the embers of a volcano, ready to spew out a lava of emotions. The little fists, clenched until the knuckles turned white, let go of his shirt, and her voice, usually soft like a spring stream, now sounded like thunder. Dorothy slammed the door to her room and collapsed onto her bed, sobbing with all her might. She didn't understand when things had gone wrong, when that day that promised so much had turned into devastation and bitterness. She tried to imagine a future where there was no oppressive void, nor a constant feeling of alienation, where her presence was welcome and her words heard. Theon would surely now think that she was pathetic and didn't deserve love, and at that moment, she felt an incredible hatred towards herself. She was going to live a kinder life than anyone else. Would that really be her path to redemption? After that day, Dorothy couldn't get out of bed for several days. Her temperature rose and her whole body hurt, and the nanny was worried about her health. The reality, which had fallen upon her so quickly and cruelly, dispelled her dreams. That day seemed to be the beginning of the end of illusions. Everything turned out like that. She did something wrong. Her childish soul, unaccustomed to such shocks, found no answer. The only thing she could do was be kinder. And so several days passed without Ray coming to see her. It was no wonder. His sister screamed very loudly at him. Perhaps now he will hate her. Before she had time to think about it, timid footsteps were heard in the hallway, and the door opened silently. Her brother was there again, and she didn't understand why he was at her door again with such an enthusiastic face. The boy came running into the room. Happy, sure that his sister would love it, he brought the first tomatoes he had grown and, in secret, he made a bed. He told her how he planted zucchini and eggplants, and that, when they grew, he would show them to her first. The crown prince, who was officially accepted into the best academy, wasted his time in the garden beds, and it is unlikely that he spent all that time studying. Dorothy sighed because in her past life, someone had done everything possible to win against him. Unlike her, he managed to do it without any effort, but the worst thing was that the boy didn't even think about it. All the time he played his favorite games, did what he wanted, and during all this time, he occupied the place that belonged to him as prince. Even his words about studying diligently every week were simply impossible to believe. The boy was very worried because his sister was still angry with him, and today he came to ask her for forgiveness. Last time she refused, and he begged her insistently to play with him, even though she didn't want to at all. He didn't understand why his sister refused to spend time with him, but today it was as if she had changed. And for the first time, she turned to him instead of kicking him out of the room. She decided to live more kindly than the others this time, and admitted that in that way, he could never become a good emperor. It was time for Ray, the future ruler, to grow up and not get involved in stupid things, and childish ones. And yet, this desire to keep him from becoming emperor is only possible because she herself could not escape the fate of a tyrant. With a cheerful smile, she offered to try the delicious tomatoes and promised to do her best at the academy and become a great older brother. Nothing works with this boy, and his sister just wanted him to do his job well. It seemed to Ray that she needed to be sitting in the palace all the time, if he thought about it. Until now, she had never been outside the fortress walls. She didn't even study at Epistemia, but in her past life, she wandered so much that now she didn't even feel curious about many things. Her brother insisted that his sister had never been outside the palace. It was impossible to be sitting in a room all the time. He was sure that Dorothy might like it, and suggested they leave the palace together. The cold answers cut the young master's heart every time she denied him any pastime. The restless boy continued to follow her, trying to persuade her to finally go for a walk together. But Dorothy never tired of refusing. She thought he would finally calm down if she refused, but the young knight tried by all means to reach her. Finally, the moment arrived when the princess could no longer take it anymore, and something had to be done urgently. She had to agree, but in exchange, she promised that she would go alone with the nanny or with the knight, but not with him at all. Still, she agreed to go out, and even with those conditions, her brother was incredibly happy that she had made at least that decision. The first thing the nanny took care of was the clothing, and I really liked that Dorothy had to go out in that particular dress. It was a lilac dress, very cute and soft that, in the nanny's opinion, suited her incredibly well. The nanny really wanted to put a dress on the girl. Finally, the day had arrived when she could see the brightness of her walking outfit. The nanny held Dorothy's little hand tightly as she led her through the cobbled streets where the merchants and artisans were already busy. The city was full of life. The bells of the hot pastry stalls tinkled in the market square, and the smell of spices and freshly baked goods floated in the air. There were always many people here, and the nanny asked me to hold her hand tightly so as not to get lost. In her past life, Dorothy had never walked hand in hand with anyone here, and she felt a little uncomfortable. There was a wonderful view of the city from here, and Dorothy had never seen it so alive from there. A completely different world, unlike her quiet home outside the city walls. Here every corner breathes history. Every stone seems to hold the secrets of centuries. Passers-by, dressed in bright and never-before-seen clothes, laughed and talked, their voices merging into a melodic bustle. In her memory, there was a wind saturated with the smell of blood, a city exhausted by war, and a street of people who looked more like corpses. Now she saw what an empire without tyranny was like. This city was beautiful and alive. Musicians performed in the square, and the pleasant melody of violins echoed throughout the street. Once the nanny enthusiastically suggested going to see a fascinating show, and the girl wondered if she could do it. The nanny squeezed her hand tightly, and she felt her own heart skip a beat with a strange delight. She could at least enjoy a little of this wonderful world she had never been to before. Perhaps today is the most wonderful and peaceful day, if someone doesn't ruin her new life. The girl, with her hands tied, lay on the cold concrete floor in a soft purple dress, and her eyes covered with a black blindfold. Voices were heard in the room. Someone was going to kill the girl, but they had to make sure the money got into their hands. The villains were arguing about whether the girls could have any use, until some brat started wearing clothes more expensive than their entire house. After her rebirth, Dorothy hadn't even picked up a sword, and suddenly something happened. Although 3 days before everything was fine. Together with the nanny, they walked around the city. The nanny was incredibly happy there, and Dorothy even sometimes thought that she shouldn't have come there at all. The nanny suggested buying the princess's favorite books before returning while they were still near the bookstore. The only thing they had to do was enter an alley where there was a small shop. And after the walk, they wanted to go eat some delicious desserts. The nanny chose the shortest path, where there were no people, through that same alley. She just wanted to see the young girl enjoying the new books, but when she entered the alley, a villain was waiting for them there. There was a loud thud. The nanny fell unconscious to the concrete floor. The little one didn't have time to understand anything. Dorothy wanted to run to help her, but a man's rough hand applied a damp handkerchief to her face. A breath, and the next second, the reality before the young princess's eyes began to blur, as if drifting further and further away. She managed to see that the nanny was lying in that gloomy alley and showing no signs of life. And her consciousness was gradually clouding. Once upon a time, there was a young lady who was a majestic empress, and now she lay like this before some villains. It is difficult to even imagine such a pitiful sight, but the girl was not afraid. Even if she died young, she still didn't want to die at the hands of those scoundrels. Dorothy finally woke up. 3 whole days had passed. She lay unconscious, and the villains sent a nanny for money. But there was still no news of her. They sent her away. Something will happen anyway, but the emperor may refuse to get rid of her as if she were a played card. She couldn't completely trust Karnan, and now she had to manage on her own. This method was not her style, and as soon as she regained consciousness, one of the criminals immediately approached her and called her brat. To begin with, Dorothy decided to pretend she was a weak child and called the villain uncle. The 2 kidnappers looked like market bandits who had appeared out of nowhere, and she made a stupid face and asked if he was really Dad's friend. The villain cheerfully declared that he was really Dad's friend. He was sure that now he was fooling this stupid girl. Dorothy already imagined how she would finish him off, and with a sweet, childish voice, said that then she would call him uncle. The criminal called her beautiful doll, and once in her life, there really was a man who was willing to do anything just to make his fear smile. The villain began to tell a wonderful story about how his uncle used to fight terrible villains, but the only weapon were his own bare hands. And hearing all this, Dorothy thought it would be better if he wrote books. At first, the situation was unfavorable, but thanks to that she had time to look around and see where she was. Dorothy pulled his shirt and said she was very hungry. It was lunchtime for the criminals. Another was indignant, as if they had a children's camp here and why they had to feed this little brat. On the table there was fragrant fried chicken, eggs, and bread, and the princess understood that she needed to eat something urgently to survive. They were enjoying the delicious food, dreaming of the money they would get by kidnapping her, and it was simply disgusting. The kinder villain sat the girl at the table, and the other couldn't understand if he had decided to play with her. After 3 days of fasting, Dorothy felt bad, and she simply had to eat something now. In an instant, a sharp knife blade appeared near her throat, the criminal said. They grabbed her to kill her. Because of some dolls so rich that they didn't look like theirs, everything inside her churned, and she even had to endure their appearance. Another insisted that it was too much, but that the criminal was going to kill the girl if they didn't receive the ransom. They treated her like a thing. It was quite disgusting, and one of the thieves still tied her up with ropes. A loud scream was heard. Something scared the malicious thieves, and under the table the girl saw a small scorpion. Surprisingly, there are no scorpions in the capital, but the thieves were clearly scared by the terrible insect. Here Dorothy was tormented by hunger, and they were afraid of some scorpion. The girl said she was willing to catch them, and they give her bread and milk. She smiled and asked for just 2 sticks, and the thieves had to agree to her sly trick. She had been watching the game sticks for a long time, and it was strange that they were scared by the little scorpion, which she skillfully grabbed by the tail. The thieves screamed like little children, asking her to throw it outside, and promised her that, as soon as she did it, they would give her food. Dorothy brought the scorpion closer to them and warned them that she also wanted food tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. They could only agree. The girl walked down the dark corridor and realized that all this time she had been underground. Once she came out, she realized why the villains didn't really pay attention to her. And wherever she looked, it was not entirely clear where she could go in that endless desert. And where the town was. The thieves kept their word, and while she chewed the bread, the princess wished another scorpion would appear. The thieves heard a rumor that a princess had disappeared in the capital, and that someone had kidnapped her. Sitting in front of them was a girl in an expensive dress and long blonde hair, and she could probably be that same princess. The thieves needed to solve this, so they left the hut, leaving Dorothy alone. If these two want to survive, they won't send her to the palace, and as the princess thought, waiting for the emperor is a crazy idea. She found a large knife, and that should be enough to deal with these villains. The girl heard the conversation. The thieves whispered that they must kill the girl immediately, and then leave right away. One of them was against it. Why kill the girl? She is a princess, and if she survives and hands them over, they will end up in the grave. They wouldn't leave the princess's kidnappers alive. They decided to take care of the girl, and her fate was already determined, so I had no choice but to take the knife into my own hands. It turned out that the thieves were at a huge disadvantage and had definitely caught the wrong girl. They entered the room. Dorothy was already ready to attack, to finish off the villains once and for all. Holding a sharp knife firmly in her hands, she attacked one of them from behind. And he certainly didn't expect this from a little girl. There were few chances, and there was only one way to win since there were two thieves. And she alone, with a wild scream, lunged at the first thief, pointing the knife at his face. The blade snatched hastily from the kitchen table, barely pierced. The thick fabric of his shirt leaving a cut, Dorothy was full of rage and fear. She knew she was weak, defenseless in the body of this little girl. But she couldn't give up. The kidnapper grabbed little Dorothy by the neck, his cold and sweaty fingers, squeezing the tender skin, depriving her of air. Dorothy desperately tried to break free, scratching the attacker's hands with her little nails. But it was in vain. The strength was unequal. He grabbed her hand. The knife fell from the young princess's hands while she stared at the villain and gasped for lack of air. She didn't have the strength in her child's body, so she couldn't attack and show what she was capable of. The criminal yelled at her to shut up and that he would let her die in peace, and warned her that no matter how much she tried, she couldn't do anything. It is unlikely that she couldn't do absolutely anything, no matter how much she struggled. She couldn't defeat Ray, and she couldn't get into Epistemia. Rage boiled inside the girl. She pushed the criminal with all her might, and in all her life she was never able to attract her father's attention. Thought seemed to give her strength, but the most important thing was that Theon still didn't love her. The subjects she trusted were supposed to kill her, and her anger helped her deal with the criminal. He flew to the side, and a huge cut appeared on his leg. The criminal begged to be let live, and she saw those eyes before her again, the ones she often saw before being reborn, the eyes that looked at the terrible monster. But why did she see them again, when she just wanted to live a quiet life? She spoke quietly so that they would finally leave her alone, because she promised herself to be a good girl. Why couldn't everyone just leave her alone? Now Dorothy just wanted everyone to let her live a happy life until she died. She managed to escape from the thieves. There wasn't a single light in that desert, and the girl was incredibly scared of her own helplessness. If she could control the spirit of light, she would surely be better off than she is now. The worst thing is that, if her beloved brother Ray had been in her place, everyone would probably have come to save him long ago. Even now she thought about it, being in the endless desert, and laughed at her own stupid thoughts. Dorothy, exhausted, collapsed onto the quicksand that wrapped around her like a shroud. And in that silent embrace, she felt the last spark of life fading away. Her eyes were half closed. The world around her became dark and blurry. Could they find her? Would they find them, perhaps? Little Dorothy's strength left her, leaving behind the horror that lurked in the villains' houses, and she found herself in a vast and sinister desert. Her heart beat slower and slower, as if refusing to believe in the possibility of salvation. Around her, there was only an abyss of desert, and an abyss of despair. Death alone, looking at the stars, was somehow too much for her. The sounds were lost in the distance, and how ruthless was the Almighty. She thought the end had come, but he gives her the desire to live again. In the past, she killed a large number of people, but she still fought for life. Maybe they were the bandits sent by the Emperor again, and she only had enough strength to raise her hand, and then fall face down into the sand again. People always walked away from her. Only those thoughts came to my head. It's funny, of course, but she was always exactly like that. The girl just wanted to believe that one day someone would love her with all their heart, and even the bustle of people approaching seemed like a dream to her. She prayed that at least someone would come to her aid, and nearby, she heard voices speaking about the princess. Like a dream, the bright veil of the desert receded, leaving behind only a vague feeling of cold and fear. A familiar bed, toys scattered on the floor, a bookshelf adorned with brightly colored covers. Could this really be her room? Her heart, which had recently frozen with horror, began to beat more evenly. Filling her body with warmth, someone had really found her. Truly, she ran into the Imperial Knights. This could be considered luck in the midst of a series of misfortunes. She heard the Emperor's voice, speaking of some nameless kidnappers. Karnan was trying to figure out what happened. He came here because she was about to be kidnapped, and the little one never saw him near her bedroom door. Be that as it may, he is the father whose blood runs through her veins. He suddenly said, "Now no one dares to make noise." He ordered that whoever leaked this information be caught, and that it be officially announced that they were only baseless rumors, and that anyone who spread them would face severe punishment. Due to his greed, Dorothy began to think that Karnan's hatred had diminished. She didn't fight with Ray and didn't take anything from him, but he still didn't love her. Maybe this is a punishment for the tyranny of her past life, and now she is paying for the sins she once committed. Dorothy's temperature dropped to a slight fever, and she was recovering, but very slowly. In front of the bed was the nanny, whom she saw for the first time, and she wanted to know if everything was okay with the princess. It seemed that her previous nanny had already been fired, and Dorothy was certainly a little better than with the thieves. If you think about it, it wasn't the nanny's fault at all. She was always kind, and took care of the princess with all her might. Since this happened, the girl really hoped that everything would be okay for her, and could live a peaceful life. The doctor warned that the princess should go to a quieter place to rest and recover. In the Sarishan domain, there is an excellent place where you can improve your health and recover from what happened. A great opportunity to leave the palace and get away from the Emperor, Ray and Theon with Julia, who will quietly go to the academy. In a place where no one sees her, gather strength so as not to suffer, as it happened in a past life. During all this time, the princess was afraid of taking the path of a tyrant again, so she avoided this possibility in every possible way. If she used her power in the right way, maybe she could protect someone in this life, and happily agreed to go on vacation. To live well, strength is needed. It was already too hot there, and the nanny asked if she really wanted to go alone. The princess had never behaved like this before and wondered where such adult stubbornness came from. Brother Ray appeared in the doorway, and the room was filled with the light of his serene smile, holding a bouquet of wildflowers in his hands. The young knight was incredibly worried about whether his little sister was okay, and after the kidnapping, he went to her room every day. The nanny talked about the vacation, the warm weather, and the proximity to the sea that would help the princess relax. And the child asked sadly if she really had to go somewhere. Having made her final decision, Dorothy asked him to leave the room, and not to try to persuade her anymore. Just in case, she explained that her kidnapping was not her fault, but that it was Ray who suggested she leave the castle. He was very worried about this, but it didn't matter anymore. Everything was over and she was fine. Ray couldn't imagine that his little sister would really go to another castle, because she would be completely alone there. He offered to go to the academy together and was willing to help her, always. And when she stayed with him and didn't go anywhere, the princess couldn't go there, and her brother asked her not to give up so easily, because the intelligent Dorothy could do it. Actually, he didn't know anything about it. Dorothy had tried with all her might to get in the past, but the day came when the Emperor ordered her to refuse entry. This boy couldn't know this. Everything was already decided. Dorothy would go on vacation and recover, and the conversation was closed. She sent the boy out of the room again. The nanny was sure that she behaved that way because she was worried about her sister. Although she knew perfectly well, Ray was the good guy. She was the villain, and it had always been that way. In those moments, Dorothy thanked Karnan for his indifference and couldn't imagine that she would leave so quickly. Good thing she had told Ray not to follow her, as just thinking about him was too noisy. As soon as she approached the carriage, Theon suddenly appeared upon learning that the princess was going on vacation. Above all, she didn't expect to see him again, her beloved, whom she met with a trembling heart every time. Now, being in such a state, she didn't want to see him at all, and the princess asked him why he was suddenly asking her that. To be honest, he came to give her something, and the boy exhaled that he wasn't late for the meeting. It was a small gift, nothing special. In his palm were 3 multicolored candies. He brought them because he was worried that the princess might get sick in the carriage. Although perhaps she doesn't like sweets at all. It was surprising that he really came here for her and brought these sweets to please her. Theon said that suddenly the princess is going on vacation far away. Now they won't be able to see each other as often. He felt incredibly sorry, and the girl couldn't believe he was saying such nice words. Theon hoped that Dorothy would recover very quickly, and that time would return soon. Dorothy had never felt anything like this in her past life, and Theon really likes her. No, she couldn't think like that. Anyway, nothing would come of it, and turning around she said quietly that she needed to leave. The boy looked down sadly, and believed that he would definitely find the princess again. Dorothy tried to keep calm, avoid letting her feelings dominate her, and avoid the history repeating itself. However, Theon thought about her, came especially to say goodbye to her, and brought her these sweets. Each candy seemed like a promise of return, a promise of adventure, a promise that even when she was alone, there was always someone somewhere thinking about you. They didn't just contain a sweet taste, but also a piece of hope, a little flame that Theon had lit in her heart. Soon the princess arrived at a beautiful place. She couldn't even imagine she could breathe deeply once she left the imperial palace. The place where she killed Rey, then her lover died. And if you think about it, she only had bad memories in the palace. There was no trace of the former tyrant there, and really everything was starting to work out well in her life. She looked at the sweets and thought that maybe there she could start over. A maid from the castle named Clara was worried about the princess and asked her to wait a little so she wouldn't get lost. Clara took care of the weak princess in such a remote place, and she was really demoted so much in rank. Her interest would be short-lived, but suddenly Clara warned her that there was someone else she would like to introduce to the princess. A tall and majestic man appeared before the lady, who was obliged to serve under his command. Knight Stefan Gringwald. His face was familiar to her in the past. The princess had bullied this man. He was the one who once rose to the rank of vice-captain, and the princess often called him a fool. She looked with contempt at this man, who had never been a worthy knight for her. His story ended tragically. He received a mortal wound, and the princess felt sorry for him, because she wanted to compete with him personally. She asked him to call her princess, and in moments like those, the wisest thing she could do was answer. In the city of the best knight, there is no future called bright. She hoped that the knight wouldn't regret his choice, and one day he would also die at her hands. He was 18 years old now, which meant he had just joined the order of knighthood, at a time when he needed to gain experience and skills to advance. He arrived here thanks to a princess. The princess held out her hand to greet him, but the knight didn't immediately notice it was a handshake. He patted her palm, greeting the young girl, and was ready to serve her. Although she didn't ask for a pat on the hand, as always, this man showed himself to be insolent in the princess's absence. The fact that Dorothy has known Stefan for just a couple of minutes suggests that a desire alone is not enough to live a prosperous life. Dorothy sat down to write a wish list to achieve a goal. She needed to create her own criteria, but she didn't fully understand what it meant to live kindly. The girl decided to ask Clara what she should do to live well, and the first thing she replied was that she should first listen to her parents. The wish list for a prosperous life made her laugh cheerfully, and Stefan looked at the sheet of paper with interest. The princess was indignant because they laughed and angrily covered the paper with her hands. It was just that a prosperous life sounded so sweet to Clara that she couldn't help but laugh. The words dear did not apply at all to the princess, who in her past life had been the greatest tyrant. Clara offered to give her dad a massage 10 times, which sounded really unpleasant, and something Dorothy shouldn't have suggested. They say a smile makes everyone feel better, and in this case, the nanny asked the princess to smile more. It wasn't that the princess liked to smile, it was simply that she saw no reason to smile. The first thing that comes to mind when we think of a kind person is a smiling face. And there is some truth in Clara's words. The princess tried to smile with a sweet and kind smile, and surprisingly, she succeeded the first time. So first of all, you must smile in a friendly way. Second, don't look at other people's things. And third, save a million people. And these are quite good actions. How many people died because of her in her past life? Not only the people she killed with her own hands, but also those who died during battles. Disasters and diseases she could not prevent. The people who could have lived if Rei had become emperor died because of her. So, as an act of repentance, the princess wanted to save double in this life. Hear words of thanks 3 times a week, donate to charity every month. And for now, that was enough. Having made a big plan, the princess felt a little tired and went out to the balcony to admire the infinite sea. Before her stretched an infinite, blue canvas of the sea where the waves rolled lazily towards the shore, leaving behind a foamy lace. She felt her strength return and had an irresistible desire to touch that expanse of sea, to feel the sand under her feet, and to hear the cries of the seagulls. Dorothy had told her nanny she wanted to go for a walk, and the place had an air of peace, an eternity that contrasted with her recent fears. Knight Stefan went with her. He was supposed to accompany the princess and not leave her alone. For some reason, the knight followed her. Fortunately, he didn't interfere and simply remained silent. A gentle breeze ruffled her blonde hair, and she closed her eyes, enjoying the moment of peace. Walking slowly along the velvety sandy beach, she saw a figure in the distance. Who was it? Did anyone else really live in the area, besides the inhabitants of the castle? The boy was sitting on the shore. There were tears in his eyes. He was looking thoughtfully into the distance. Dorothy stopped, and as she approached, she immediately recognized Aiden Bront, the main confidant of the Tyrant Dorothy Millenio, and the most beautiful man she ever met. They had a special and strong relationship, and he was also the most influential and dangerous. Aiden Bront, nicknamed the Golden-Eyed Angel in noble circles, was popular among the aristocracy. Every man and woman wanted to exchange at least a few words with him. He was so magnificent. There was not a single person who was not on Aiden's side, and he captivated from the first seconds. A devoted servant, willing to act only for Dorothy, gave her precious jewels that she loved. In her past life, he helped kill Rei and was absolutely crazy about his beautiful empress. One day, he told her about the death of Julia de Levine. He killed everyone she hated for her. He considered her his son, in fact, only he understood Dorothy and her true feelings, and she thought she had only found a faithful servant. Eden was indignant because the Empress kept a man like Lord Theon close to her. Wanting to get engaged to her, he promised her that he would treat her with great love, and it is true that Eden did all this for her. In the end, Dorothy realized that she had made the wrong decision only when facing death. When she walked to the place of her execution, many people found him innocent. The advisor, who did everything possible to protect the country, was under the power of these wounds. And like a snake, he managed to obtain amnesty with the help of his tongue. The Empress went to death row, also carrying his sins, and he also said that he would become the next emperor after her death. In this life, you must definitely stay away from him, but now sitting in front of her was a stupid child. Crying. Eden really could cry like that, and he was completely different from the person she knew. What would happen if Eden didn't take the path of evil? What would happen if he could live well, and perhaps have the chance to live a new life? She approached slowly and greeted him, and the boy looked at the little stranger with fear. He jumped abruptly when she wanted to ask him if something had happened to him and why he was crying. Now the boy looked incredibly scared and moved away from the girl. The young knight didn't even listen to her, quickly turned around and ran away. Maybe she shouldn't have talked to him. She should have left him crying alone. Why was he sitting there alone and crying bitterly, with absolutely no one by his side? Then his father spilled pomegranate juice on the princess's dress during the wedding ceremony. The child was the illegitimate son of the Duke of Bront, and that was really why he was crying. The Duke accepted him into the family after his birth, so he couldn't enter the academy until he reached the age of majority, and he had no right to appear in high society. They always wanted to hide him simply because he was born out of wedlock, and feeling tired, Dorothy decided to return to the castle. Only now did she realize that the child was in the same situation as her, and that he simply had never had parents. Rumors spread that a known princess from the capital had arrived, and people started sending letters offering a visit. Therefore, the princess was only going to greet them and end the conversation, which made no sense to her. The noble aristocrats were simply delighted to see the princess, who looked like a royal doll. Everyone tried to treat her to delicious sweets, and many knew that Dorothy was coming there because she was sick. They seemed to treat her like a little girl, although she was perfectly capable of feeding herself, and that really irritated her. She wasn't even picky about food, and the ladies were crazy about the princess's sweet face. It was too exhausting. It seemed there was too much Ray around Dorothy. The aristocrats tried by all means to appease the princess, even offering to give her medicines, which the girl refused. Tired of so much attention, Dorothy asked Stefan and Clara to take her out of there as quickly as possible. She could no longer hear those flattering words and looked at the nanny with a serious look. One of the noble ladies said that she would like to invite the princess to visit her one day. It was the Duchess of Bront, and she kindly asked if Dorothy would mind visiting her castle. The Duchess promised never to offer bitter medicines, but only delicious sweets and cakes. There was talk of the Duke of Bront, and the young Lord Eden would surely be there. After their first meeting, she was a little worried about how their communication could turn out. This was the beginning of Eden's straight path, and the girl happily accepted the offer. She decided to add this to her wish list for a prosperous life, and the next day she went to visit him. The noble ladies loved Dorothy so much that they were absolutely thrilled, but it was only because she was a princess. Whoever she was, we looked at her with great love in our eyes, and Clara was sure that all this came from their tender feelings. Little Dorothy had never been treated with tenderness before, and really something was starting to change in this life. Suffering the pains of loneliness, she never asked her lover for anything like that. Dorothy was afraid that in this case, he would simply hate her body because their relationship was already going terribly wrong. Before the great love, she was always weak, and in love, she was not that terrible tyrant. The princess wondered if she could live a good life, although in reality, she didn't even know how to love properly. But it was worth trying to change everything. The Duke greeted the princess with respect, as she had come a long way to reach his castle. A luxurious table was prepared for the girl, but when she looked around, she still didn't see the young knight. Last time, the Duke didn't come and asked for forgiveness for greeting the princess so late, asking if everything was okay in the new place. Dorothy said she had heard that the ducal family had a son, and they were surprised that she knew their Jordan. He had studied at Epistemia, but it wasn't about him, and some time ago she had seen the son of the Bront family. Eden, the princess suddenly confessed that she would like to meet him right now, and these words made the Duke shudder. Upon hearing about Eden, the Duke exchanged glances with the Duchess, wondering if the princess had already met him. While walking, Dorothy accidentally met him on the beach. It is possible that their son is not here now. She noticed a certain uneasiness on the part of the Duke, who asked if the princess was really interested in his son. They seemed to have decided that the girl had fallen in love with him at first sight. But that didn't matter anymore. They replied that the young knight was not feeling well that day, and therefore, he couldn't attend the dinner, but Dorothy admitted that they could become friends. The Duke agreed to accompany the princess to his son, and now he was in the garden, completely alone. The boy shivered and turned around, as if he didn't expect to see guests there, since it was rare for anyone to come to see him. He looked at the young girl with surprise. The Princess Dorothy Millenio herself had come to visit him. A mysterious and pleasant smile appeared on the face of the young knight, with huge golden eyes. He bowed politely to the princess, admitting that it was incredible to meet her for the first time. It was a great honor for him to meet Dorothy in person, and a great joy that she wanted to see him in person. Clara decided to leave the children alone, and warned that if Dorothy needed anything, she could call her at any time. They sat facing each other, the princess who had become a tyrant, and the boy who in the future would love her madly. The young knight asked with interest what brought the army there, and it seemed she had nothing to do there alone. He is really pretending not to know her, and probably just doesn't want to mention what happened on the beach. Dorothy said that at that moment she was resting in a nearby castle, and it was too hot to stay inside all the time. Eden spoke politely and noticed that the princess looked very thin. She might still be sick. The boy seemed to be genuinely kind, or was hiding his feelings, and Dorothy couldn't understand this at all. She knew something about this boy. If you look closely, he can raise his eyebrows. Eden has an unconscious habit that manifests when he lies or pretends. And now Dorothy wanted to know if he was sincere with her or not, and said with confidence on her face, "There is only beauty." Upon hearing these words, the young master felt embarrassed, and his cheeks turned incredibly red. Does he not even know that he is not actually a handsome and attractive man? The Eden that she knew before would have started behaving defiantly, but he was really so different in his youth. In response, he admitted that the princess was more beautiful than any other he had met so far. So she knew, a snake, seducing people with sweet words. But are these words true now? In fact, he never had friends. His older brother didn't like him going out to the street, and even if he did, he heard nothing good. In any case, he was very happy that the princess came to him. A radiant smile appeared on Eden's face. Previously, Dorothy always fell for his sweet words, so she was afraid of meeting this boy. And if she becomes his true friend, she decided to invite him to visit her if he has time. Maybe this could lead to another happy life, and the boy ran carefully and kissed her on the cheek. Dorothy didn't immediately understand what had just happened, because just a second before, he was sitting in front of her. He really kissed her, and thanked the princess for the pleasant conversation and the invitation. How dare he kiss the princess on the cheek, although perhaps she is too attached to the world she knew before. Today she heard words of thanks from Edon many times, although in her past life she barely knew the word thanks. Surely this should also be counted in her wish list, because there is a possibility that he is not saying it sincerely. And Dorothy has decided to leave everything for later. At that moment, in the castle, Clara was looking for Knight Stefan to discuss something very important with her. An important day is approaching, the birthday of a sweet princess, and they cannot spend this day in the usual way. Clara was very worried and suggested that Stefan cook something for Dorothy. Clara was worried. The knight for some reason remained silent and didn't answer anything. It was really in vain that she started this conversation. Stefan remained silent, and Clara felt even more tense while she looked him straight in the eyes. Finally, he nodded in approval, and in fact, the maid had been thinking for a long time about what gift to give the princess. No matter what they gave her, little Dorothy never reacted, as if she didn't feel any joy for anything. Until now, there has been no reaction to the gifts. She is not interested in the dresses or the jewelry that other children like so much. And it seems she at least likes books. After thinking for a long time about the gift, Clara went through all the options. And finally, she thought of something. She told the knight her brilliant idea and wanted to know what he thought about it. There was no joy on Stefan's face, and surely the young girl wouldn't like this gift. The unexpected celebration should be more important than the gift itself, and Clara was sure that the princess would like it. And they still had a bunch of things to buy. Little Dorothy's birthday had arrived, and the house was full of anticipation for the celebration. A real feast was prepared for the birthday girl. The table was full of sweets. Delighting the eye with its abundance, Clara invited the princess to go for a walk on the beach. Stefan had been absent all day today, and the girls suspected that the two were plotting something. The weather was really good for walking. It was perfect for her birthday, and while walking along the beach, she saw a shiny white shell in the sand. Perhaps this sounded too arrogant, and Dorothy wondered what was beautiful about that shell. It could be that Clara buried the gift right under this basin, and something can be expected from her. She didn't find anything under the shell, and the fool was completely unable to understand their strange plans. It was empty, but why did Clara tell her to look at the shell? She searched through a mountain of shells, but found nothing. Having collected almost all the shells and nearby, the princess was indignant. But Clara did not answer. In the distance, she saw a strange silhouette and shouted where the maid had gone. The silhouette did not look like her. At first, she thought it was just a prankster dressed for carnival. But as the figure got closer, her doubts disappeared. It was a lion. An authentic lion, with a thick and lush mane that rippled in the wind and bright eyes. And intelligent, it did not roar, but walked directly toward her, without haste, as if it knew her, and was coming to meet her. Instead, a feeling of curiosity appeared, mixed with a kind of childlike trust. The huge beast stopped a few steps from her, bowing its head. She was sure that this was true, and the huge lion raised its paw and called itself Lion. Named Leo. Recently, the princess was reading a book, and Clara was nearby and asked about it. And it was the main character of the book, whose cover she used as a costume. Dorothy wanted to tell them right then and there to stop that childish masquerade. But she had to play along. She decided to take it as a good deed from a good person today. But Stefan was probably doing it for his own well-being. She placed all the collected shells on his huge paws, deciding to play a little. It was unexpected to see a pocket in the lion's costume after all. Not a kangaroo, but Clara sews pockets in the most unexpected places. And it is really possible that the reason these two started this kind of thing is because today is her birthday. The furry lion knelt in front of the young princess and majestically congratulated her on her birthday. I even felt a little embarrassed about my thoughts and felt like a child. She thanked the hero Leo, and it was a strange feeling. Someone took care of her. The strong lion picked the baby up in his arms, and finally Dorothy felt happy. He was running quickly along the beach. The princess couldn't believe that the day would come when Stefan would take her in his arms, because he had always been a knight on Ray's side. In the past, she had laughed at Stefan for choosing a bloody death, and had little appreciation for knights who were not part of noble circles, but rather came from mercenaries. Now he seemed like a different knight, a knight who made great efforts to silently follow his own path. The fate of having to forge his own path was in some aspects similar to that of the heroine, since she hadn't been born as the heir to the throne either. Unlike her, who broke on the road, Knight Stefan invariably made it to the end. Suddenly, she said he was a wonderful and brave man, and the lion just replied that he wasn't a man at all. Laughing heartily, she called him the hero lion, the character from that very book. The sun had been shining outside all day, but suddenly, a huge raindrop fell on the lion's furry mane. The sky darkened in an instant, and large, cold drops began to pound the sand, creating instant puddles. Stefan, in his real lion costume, ran toward the castle without hesitating for a second. And Dorothy, despite the speed and noise of the rain, felt a smile bloom on her face. She rushed through the raging elements, and at that moment, under the protection of Stefan's strong arms, the world around him became an exciting adventure. Clara ran to meet them, fearful for the princess, and almost called Master Lion Stefan. He seemed reluctant to take off the lion costume in front of Dorothy, and the girl began to worry that he might catch a cold outside. An unexpected letter appeared on the young lady's table. She asked the maid who it was from. Today a letter arrived from the capital, and it turns out it was sent by Brother Raymond. Leaving the letter in its place, the princess decided not to open it and leave everything for later. Finally, Mr. Stefan, who had been missing since early morning, appeared at the castle, and Clara was sure that the princess completely believed them. The corners of Stefan's lips curled unusually, probably because he thought they had managed to trick her. And Clara told him that Stefan had supposedly gone to a brief training session. If Dorothy saves for such a lie, she will look like a silly girl, she said happily. Today on the beach, she met a hero lion named Leo. Stefan wouldn't give her anything for her birthday, and neither of them expected such a turn of events. The girl asked sadly if Mr. Stefan hadn't prepared anything for her as a gift. As she pretended to be a naive girl, she couldn't let them get away with it. Her birthday is tomorrow, and to be honest, there is a gift she would like to receive from him. Learning fencing. Dorothy didn't want to be weak, and when the thieves dragged her away, she couldn't even defend herself. The princess didn't do this, worried that if she learned to handle a sword, she would become stronger and start wishing for more. But then she realized everything. Good people can also be strong. It is not the sword that determines if a person is good or bad, but the knight gladly agreed to teach her the trade and pass on his knowledge to her. After a few months, the young princess was already confidently holding a wooden stick in her hands that she used in training instead of a real sword. She felt much better. After training her body, she finally felt lighter. Stefan didn't give her a real sword. He was worried that the princess would get hurt, or he was simply jealous that her skills were growing by leaps and bounds. Hearing footsteps behind her, the princess, without thinking, brandished her wooden sword, hoping that Stefan had approached. Surprisingly, it was young Lord Eden, and fortunately, the child didn't have time to get too scared. Every day her skills improved more and more, but Dorothy felt that it still wasn't enough. She turned out to be magnificent for Eden, and in her past life she had never seen him pick up a sword, because he had many supporters who were happy to raise the sword in his place. The boy was incredibly happy that the young princess now looked much healthier than before. But that's why she came on vacation, to improve her weakened health. Dorothy was worried about sweating profusely after training, but the boy didn't mind at all. Behind the bushes, girls' voices could be heard. They thought Eden was a real hunk, and in front of them, it was as if two angels were talking. Dorothy was surprised to feel the heat of his hand, but she had told him to come if he was bored. The last time she showed him the ducal property, and now he wanted to see her castle. At first, Dorothy wanted to wash up after training and felt her hands getting very sticky. You didn't need to go to the bathroom at all, and could simply ask Clara to bring you some water to wash your face. Eden was definitely not a simple opponent, and Dorothy decided to show him her room first. The boy looked with admiration at the princess's large room, which was incredibly clean and cozy. The room was very tidy, but it turned out there was no room for the children to play. Before her reincarnation, the princess's room was quite luxurious, and she could only find peace when she had gotten everything she wanted. So she gathered everything she could in the room. She tried to fill the inner void with things, but realized that they were all useless. And it was in vain. No matter how much Dorothy thought about it, she felt pathetic. But today the young master brought her a gift. The boy Eden carried in the palms of his hands a treasure that shone brighter than 1,000 morning stars. A gold necklace that looked woven by the sun itself, and the pendant was a heart, a pulsating scarlet stone, burning like an ember forgotten in the hearth of memories. It was certainly a very expensive item, and the princess asked the boy where he had gotten it. It's no wonder it was from the Duke of Bront, but for the princess, it was something too good to accept as a gift. She was willing to accept only his sincerity, and the young knight didn't expect the young lady to reject such an elegant decoration. And she really didn't like pendants. Dorothy admitted that they hadn't seen each other recently, and that it was better to give something like that to close people. And dear ones. The boy thought they were close and dear people, but it seemed he was too excited by the fact that someone approached him first to talk and offer him friendship. From a very young age, he was an expert at playing with human emotions. The princess decided to go back to training, but on her desk there was a letter from the imperial palace. The letter was nothing more than a complaint about how difficult it was to study at an elite academy when you were the crown prince. And if Dorothy were king, she wouldn't miss this opportunity. And all that remained was to stop thinking about such things. She suggested to Eden to go for a walk. She didn't want to be in that room anymore. The boy seemed to freeze near the table where the letter was, and continued to stare blankly at the nightstand. For some reason it wasn't, and suddenly the boy asked what it was, and that thing clearly wasn't from the imperial palace. On her desk lay the same snow-white personalized handkerchief that Theon had once given her. The princess hid it abruptly and asked him to just ignore it, and it's not like it was a gift. She simply didn't return the handkerchief. And since she accepted a handkerchief from someone else, the boy decided that next time he would also give her a handkerchief. Dorothy, that light in the night, was like the first spring storm, awakening everything around her, the only one who broke through the icy shell of her isolation. Of her own free will, without coercion, she held out her hand, a gesture that for Eden, accustomed to deserted shores, sounded like a symphony. He absorbed every gesture, every movement. Her smile was like a ray of sunlight breaking through the storm clouds, dispelling the darkness of days past. He noticed a personalized scarf, and only remained to discover who had given her such a precious gift. There was a strange atmosphere in the castle today. For some reason, Dorothy felt tense. Clara approached the young lady and quietly warned her that perhaps she should return to the imperial palace. And the princess certainly didn't plan to do that. There was a terrible contagious disease spreading now, something like the flu, and they say many were even dying of pneumonia. Of course, it was possible to cure it, but it was very contagious, and the drugs to treat the disease were very expensive for ordinary people. Dorothy had no desire to leave that place, and certainly didn't want to end up in a stuffy castle in the near future. Perhaps this contagious disease is a great opportunity to expand her wish list, and in any case, it is curable. If there is a way to cure, then treating the sick is not a problem at all. And the princess herself could help with medicines and doctors. She was a real princess, and she could definitely do something like that. Although she lacked kindness, she had money in abundance. The power of money turned out to be even greater than the name had imagined. And the princess's money solved all the difficulties, and after less than half a month, the disease began to subside, and the town regained its vitality. Thanks to her, the sick inhabitants of the town recovered quickly. She started receiving letters of praise, and pride completely overwhelmed Clara. It could be considered an expense of money that was out of her control, and the princess didn't even know if she had really done good. As a token of gratitude, someone placed an entire bag of fresh potatoes for her near the palace. And fragrant, the princess couldn't believe someone was actually rewarding her help that way, since it was she who had defeated the infection. It seems people wanted to return kindness with kindness, and not just the young knight, but also everyone she helped will remember her as a good person. Until now, Dorothy hadn't been able to really feel that she had done something good, but someone had really expressed their gratitude in this way. Clara asked that the sprouted potatoes be planted in the garden, and decided to cook the rest for dinner today. It had already been 3 years since the first training, and the princess was very good at fencing. Stefan still hadn't given her a real sword, but with every moment that passed, she felt that her body was finally getting stronger. In her past life, she was a head taller than Stefan, but now she was still just a child. It wasn't that she couldn't attack properly, she couldn't even get rid of her insolent posture. The princess often worried about why her body couldn't do what she wanted. Clara always worried that the girl was doing too much, because she trained almost every day. Finally, she caught Stefan when he wasn't defending himself and could easily attack him. At that moment, she believed that she would finally win that match, at least for the first time. Imagine her surprise when Stefan skillfully caught her wooden sword with one hand. And really, he was humiliating her now, proving that she was a weakling by grabbing the sword with his bare hands. Stefan ignored her screams of anger and had to stay calm during training. With every month that passed, Ray became sadder and sadder because during all this time, his little sister hadn't answered him even once. Theon asked him not to worry, assuring him that the princess definitely reads all his letters. The boy couldn't believe Dorothy was really that busy, and Theon sadly recalled their first meeting. When he handed them the sweets before leaving, he was sure they would definitely meet again. If the academy didn't have such strict rules, my brother would have gone to her right now. They have been here for quite some time, so they should definitely be allowed to leave the academy. Hearing the bright idea, Ray became incredibly happy and ran to get ready. And Theon was already looking forward to the next meeting. Dorothy really wanted to start fighting with a real sword, but Stefan categorically refused to give her a serious weapon. The maid Clara was angry. She called Knight Stefan and Princess Dorothy for a long time for dinner, but they didn't appear. Clara always took her duties seriously, and such negligence irritated her. She shouted loud like a wild lioness. It was already past lunchtime. They were so busy training that they didn't hear anything, and how long would this continue? She was indignant because Stefan had grabbed the wooden sword. Now his hands were covered in splinters. He couldn't have thought of something less painful for his entertainment. Later, she promised to pull out all the splinters, and even sent Dorothy urgently to the bathroom before lunch, telling her to wash up after training. The princess was incredibly angry with her, because she still had a lot to do today. More than 2 years have passed since Dorothy helped overcome the disease, and people still thanked her tirelessly. And today, they sent her a bag of wilted chicory. People were surprised. They really brought something again, and the last time it was a bag of carrots. It was strange. 2 whole years had already passed. It was probably time to stop this, but she didn't know who was provoking all of this. It so happened that today, at an opportune moment, while the maids were collecting the bag, she looked out the window and saw a boy standing near a tree. Could this really be the same guy who always brings vegetables and always goes unnoticed? He was never caught and ran away very quickly. Dorothy wanted to invite him to eat with her, as a thank you, and maybe she should catch him the next time he brought a bag. The ingredients weren't the freshest, but people still put their whole heart into it. And thanks to them, the chef has a special mission every month. Today, another letter arrived from the capital from the young Master of Paradise, and this time he sent 2 letters at once. Dorothy still hadn't read anything, but she realized that one of the letters wasn't addressed to her. The second letter was intended for Mr. Stefan. It came from the Order of Knighthood, with a note for personal delivery. For the first time in all these years, Stefan received a personal letter. He was surprised to pull a snow-white sheet of paper from the envelope. Even Clara couldn't understand the strange expression on the young man's face. But everyone was interested in what was written there. The letter spoke of a knighthood exam for promotion, which meant that Stefan had the opportunity to become a knight of the highest rank. It is undoubtedly good news, but if we look at it from another point of view, it means that he may leave here soon. The news was truly wonderful, an opportunity that arises every few years. And not for all knights, and Dorothy was anxious to see the letter. The letter said that a promotion test would be held among the knights who met the requirements of the Radiant Order. And to arrive on time, they had to leave this very week. No one will come to replace her, which means that the Imperial Palace will no longer provide Princess Dorothy with a personal knight to protect her. Although it was a very quiet place, and Dorothy had already learned fencing with Stefan, so she could defend herself, surprisingly, the Emperor supported her all this time. Stefan was left alone with Dorothy, and Clara went to see how the food preparation was going. The princess said quietly that she was sure Stefan was a very skilled knight and capable, and that he would definitely pass the exam. During all this time he served here, there was nothing remarkable, although he could spend time with other knights. And Dorothy feared that he wouldn't be able to rise in rank. Maybe he won't protect the princess, but the crown prince himself, although they weren't together for a long time. They were together, and he wanted to organize a farewell party for him. It was too sad to let him go tomorrow, and really she and that rude knight had gotten along so well all this time. Dorothy really wanted Stefan to fulfill it, having spent all this time, and not having got even a little bit closer. And now the princess just wanted Stefan to be able to stay at least a little longer, to spend his last days together. Knight Stefan, whose hands still had the marks of painful splinters from his clumsy handling of a wooden sword, resolutely took Princess Dorothy by both hands. He promised to protect her. It was his mission and his duty, and no matter what dangers might await them in the future, he swore never to abandon her. He called himself a personal knight, but Dorothy realized that it would be better for him to rise higher than to stay there. By her side, it was strange that the people around her did such silly things, gave up their benefits, and acted to their own detriment, and Dorothy, with tears in her eyes, asked why he was giving up good things for something worse. He leaned a little closer. His blue eyes searched hers, looking for confirmation that she understood the depth of his intention. A simple but devoted knight was willing to defend her until his last breath. The oath was part of him, a deeper meaning of his existence. He took the young princess's hand, and before her rebirth, Stefan behaved in the same spirit. Even when defeat became evident, he still tried to protect him, even though Raymond had obviously lost. And Stefan was always the type to make stupid decisions. Dorothy hugged Stefan tightly, and this hug was so sincere that it was even strange to believe it. Although the whole world points a finger at her, calling her selfish, there is nothing to be done. But now she was grateful to this man for choosing her. The lady and the knight went to the city with the hope of helping people in trouble. But for some reason, there were many people here today. People crowded around the bulletin board, and Dorothy also wanted to know what was written there. There was an entire line near an ad, but to do so you had to know how to read. And many residents didn't even know the letters. The girl tried to push her way through the crowd, but couldn't do it, and it was as if everyone had gathered in that place on purpose. The knight quickly lifted her into his arms, and Dorothy even shouted, not expecting her problem to be solved so instantly. He still considered her a little brat, and Stefan always wondered when the little princess would finally grow up. The ad indicated that this year, a tournament would be held for amateur swordsmen, and that the competition would be divided into age categories. It wasn't about the upcoming festival, there was even a reward for winning, and Dorothy realized that this was her big chance. Unlike many other princesses, whose thoughts were occupied by dresses and dances, Dorothy's heart always longed for action, the manifestation of courage and strength. Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as she told Stefan about the fencing competition and declared that they would go register right now. The young girl and the knight entered the registration tent, and the girl said confidently that she had come to participate in the tournament. The man looked surprised at the girl and warned her that her partner didn't seem to be an amateur. But the little one doesn't seem to need to eat more porridge to at least be able to grow for such competitions. Dorothy said that she wasn't that old anymore. The rules said that anyone over 10 years old could participate. The man knew it, but the young man had become completely rude, and the girl's words were like a cheeky dispute. Could it really be that her father had taught her that? Naturally, the self-confident girl didn't like the unpleasant words, and she asked him what he had just said. After all, she desired a prosperous life so much, but was not prepared to endure such terrible treatment, simply because she was a young lady. Stefan, without hesitation, stood up to protect the princess, brandished his sword sharply, and hit the lout on the table. The table legs buckled, and Stefan, angry, told the man to follow the rules indicated in the ad. Thanks to Stefan, the princess was able to register with ease and was now ready to return. Two brothers were walking through the main square. One of them was carrying heavy boxes with gifts, and the other was indignant because he was called brother here, and not young master. Dorothy wanted to do something kind before returning home, and thought that maybe someone could help if people needed help. One of the boys accidentally dropped some boxes, a porcelain vase broke, and his brother yelled at him for what he was doing, and how it was possible he couldn't do anything right. This boy turned out to be a young knight. His brother was constantly yelling at him, and every time he asked for forgiveness. The princess was there at the perfect moment and looked at Eden with surprised eyes. His brother was going to give all this to his mother, but his hated brother dropped the gifts and broke them. The boy screamed. He was truly tired of living. Eden tried to pick up the fragments of a porcelain vase, but accidentally cut his finger while trying to fix his mistake. Angered, his brother waved his arm to hit the boy, and Aiden's golden eyes saw his salvation. It was little Dorothy. She stood confidently in front of the young master and asked his insolent brother to stop immediately. Stefan had already grabbed the boy's hand, and he began to squirm and scream. What is this man doing? The princess extended her hand to the unfortunate boy, wanting to do a good deed today, and asked him not to cry and get up from the ground. A tear rolled down Eden's cheek, but now it was a tear of relief. In that moment, she was like an angel descending from heaven to save a lost soul. The boy felt so small, so helpless before a world that seemed hostile to him and unfair. His brother started yelling. The girl really didn't know who he was, but ignorance did not exempt the other person from responsibility. This time she was kind and did nothing, but she warned him that if the boy wanted to live a long time, he must behave appropriately. Eden felt that with her appearance everything would change. He still didn't know how, but he knew he was no longer alone in his problems. Dorothy, his personal knight in disguise, came to protect him. Little Dorothy, with eyes shining with compassion, gently pulled his hand. And Eden, still trembling from the fear he had experienced, looked at her in disbelief. Did this little but determined princess really care about him, his brother? With his rude jokes and constant disdain, insisted that no one cared about the little ones. He approached Stefan and thanked him. Thanks to him, they were able to solve a big problem and help Eden. Could the princess really pay attention to someone like him? Her concern was not only unexpected for him, but also touching. It was definitely an act of kindness on Dorothy's part, but suddenly the boy screamed, and she turned to see what had happened. He had a bright red mark on his face from a slap, and the boy's eyes were incredibly sad. The cheek was very swollen from the blow, but the young knight made a reservation. This happens to him often, and everything is fine. He simply endured it, although the previous Eden could have easily gotten out of this situation. And his brother probably hates him because he was born on the side. The young knight was Jonathan Bront. Iden timidly pulled the princess's sleeve and wanted to ask her something. With sad eyes, he asked if he could stay with the princess until the young master stopped being angry with him. Besides, Iden was a really handsome man, and Dorothy still couldn't believe he had been completely different when he was a child. There were already some people waiting for the young princess at the castle. The living room was suddenly filled with the loud voice of admiration of her brother Ray. Before Dorothy had time to appear in the doorway, the boy ran to meet her and admitted that he had been very bored all this time. For some reason, he was there. The academy had just started its vacation, and he had just asked for time off to visit his little sister. He wasn't alone here today. Young Master Theon came with him, politely saying that he also missed the princess very much. His pleasant manners, his sweet smile and his sincere eyes, and she saw the boy in front of her again. Theon was very glad that the princess still remembered him, but Eden immediately suspected something was wrong. It turned out that Ray invited Theon to go with him, so he could also spend time in this magnificent castle. The princess grabbed her brother's hand and led him to her room to have a serious conversation with him. She didn't understand why he had taken Theon with him. She wanted to forget everything so she wouldn't doubt anymore. But why had Theon come there, and there was really no point in running away? Ray didn't understand. The princess knew her friend, and he only wanted to spend time together, and Theon happily accepted. But he didn't ask for her permission, nor her feelings, nor her opinion, although he simply wanted to please her with an unexpected visit. Organize a surprise for her. For Dorothy, this was not only an unpleasant surprise, but a true disaster, and she asked her brother and his friend to leave immediately. The boy started crying. His sister hadn't replied to his letters for many years. He was worried that she felt alone there, or that she felt offended by him. Yes, he cried, and for some reason it always turned the young princess into a villain who made people cry. She grabbed the door handle angrily, and if she stayed there a few more minutes, she would get even angrier. But when she opened the door, she saw Theon in front of her. The boy clearly heard loud shouts in the room and didn't understand why the princess wasn't happy to see them. But the unpleasant scene with the pomegranate juice and the apologies to the Duke returned to Dorothy's mind, and she didn't want to feel it. She felt sick seeing Theon, and the boy noticed that the princess looked very bad, and she really wasn't well. Dorothy ran to her room. She didn't talk to anyone anymore and couldn't deal with the strong feelings. She wanted Theon to only see her best side, but somehow, each time, ridiculous situations occurred, and it was as if nothing had changed. Why was this happening just now? Why was she constantly blushing? And in that second, she felt someone take her hand. All this time, she had been waiting for Theon to take her hand someday. She really wanted to turn around, but for some reason she couldn't do it. Feeling completely unworthy of this, the princess stopped, and Theon asked her to give him at least a little time. After apologizing for such an unexpected visit, the young man realized that he should have sent someone with the news of their arrival. But they decided to go there spontaneously. The princess was very upset that he, who wasn't even a member of the imperial family, had come there, but it wasn't like that at all, and the boy simply wanted to see her. He confessed it sincerely, and then, after seeing each other for the last time, when she said goodbye to him when he left on a trip, he often thought about Dorothy. Dorothy listened with great expectation, while the boy explained that he had been very worried all this time. Little Dorothy, whose days had been filled with dreams about Theon's attention, found herself in a strange confusion. Her heart, which had always yearned for his gaze, his smile, now seemed incapable of accepting his care. Theon's new and unexpected care, although deeply welcomed, now felt strange, almost like an intrusion into her private dreams. That stupid situation with the pomegranate juice, another incident, remained engraved in the young princess's memory, and she found it difficult to deal with those feelings. That's why Theon said he wanted to accompany the prince and didn't understand if his company was unpleasant for the princess. It was difficult for her to even look him in the eyes, but the lady mustered up her courage and answered sincerely that she didn't like it at all. The words sounded like a relief to the young knight. A stone fell from his soul, and surely things were just different. However, he couldn't understand why she always looked at him with such a strange expression and sad on her face. There really was something wrong with his face, and the girl was worried. He just didn't look particularly pretty. Theon knelt in front of her. He took her hand tenderly and confessed that he only wanted them to get along and communicate well with each other. He didn't want to insist, he didn't want to pressure. His intentions were as pure as a spring. Theon just wanted them to be able to spend more time together. In her past life, Dorothy dreamed every day that they would finally get along. But one day Theon turned away from her and left, without listening to her pleas. She had said these words to him hundreds, even thousands of times, but only now had she finally heard sincere confessions from him. And warm, her thoughts were interrupted by another boy's voice. It was Eden, who interrupted a moment of such sweet and fragile communication. His cheek still hurt a lot. He came to ask for some medicine to relieve the pain. They found them at a very interesting moment. The young knight was sitting in front of the princess, holding her hand tightly. He had to timidly let go of Theon's hand, because he had completely forgotten about the guest she had brought herself, and whom she had promised to take care of. Eden looked at the young knight, with suspicion, and vague doubts took hold of the boy's heart. Theon was no fool. He understood everything perfectly and saw in the stranger's eyes that spark of hostility that was impossible to hide. After asking Eden to wait near the door, the princess entered the room and promised to bring the medicine she had left somewhere there. Theon said he wanted to get along with her, but she ran away like that, and now he felt like a stupid girl. And naive. Suddenly, the boy said he didn't need medicine, that he was just a little swollen, but that he himself had asked for it. It was strange that he refused to retract his words, insisting that he didn't need the medicine. But the princess herself did. Dorothy even found a good medication that would quickly help relieve the pain and the swelling of the hematoma. Dorothy looked with suspicion at the boy, who insisted that the princess seemed to have a fever and needed medication. She wasn't sick at all, and asked the boy not to pay attention to her condition. And he really guessed everything. The boy confessed that now he understood why the princess had decided to come there on vacation, and he could even cure her of that disease. His strange smile made Dorothy feel uncomfortable, and his voice was completely different. Suddenly he approached her and whispered in her ear that he really liked the princess, and that he had chosen that moment for a reason. Dorothy closed her eyes tightly and felt again that vile lie that had haunted her in her past life. She didn't like those jokes at all, and the boy assured her that he wasn't even smiling at them. It seemed she was really sick. It only remained to kick him out of the room, because if she waited longer, Dorothy felt she was about to explode. She warned him that when he wanted to return home, to call Clara, she would prepare the carriage. He saw Dorothy, that wonderful princess, whose presence filled the world with a soft glow, moving away from him while Theon approached. He liked Dorothy, his angel princess, and the idea that she might prefer the company of young Master Theon seemed unbearable to him. He decided to approach Theon first to introduce himself, and the boy asked gloomily who he was. Eden bowed politely and gave his name, Bront, of the Duke's family, owner of all these lands. He lied. The The princess personally applied the medicine to the bruise, and nothing bothered her anymore. However, the boy asked, surprised, if he was the only one who had to introduce himself, and for some reason, Theon stared at him and remained silent. The young knight gave his name, Theon of the Archduke Frid family, and it was a great honor for Eden to meet him in person. The boy wanted to open the door of the room where the princess was, but suddenly the young knight stopped him and warned him that he shouldn't do it that day. The princess supposedly said she wanted to rest in complete solitude and asked for no one to disturb her. Eden kept silent, trying to convince him that the princess was very tired today. She had been practicing fencing, and then she had walked around town with him. They were really that close. Eden admitted they weren't exactly close, but the most important thing between them was applying medication if anyone got hurt, and they also made sure to see each other once or twice a week. Theon, accustomed to the directness of his mentor knights, felt that this boy wasn't as simple as he seemed at first glance. Theon had the feeling that there was some hidden game behind this, some deeper meaning than the simple desire to know about the conversation. He knew that his relationship with Dorothy, no matter how much Theon tried to make it look, couldn't be as close and direct as Aiden might imply. The young knight knew that the princess was a princess, and that he was just a boy from a neighboring family. Although noble, Dorothy had rehearsed a kind smile so diligently, but it seemed to have no effect. She was always going to react like that to Theon's behavior. She was tormented by doubts, felt pathetic and angry, and had absolutely no idea what to do next. Luck had it that, when she wanted to be alone and see no one, a loud knock was heard at the door. Judging by the complete silence behind the door, it was Theon. The princess asked aloud who was there. Upon opening the door, she saw Stefan, who was probably worried about how the young lady felt. As usual, Stefan stood there with an impassive face, and the girl asked him why he had come there, how she had hurt herself, or if she was looking for Clara. But it seemed he was looking for her. Dorothy happily let him in, deciding to stay there for a while. She sat on the sofa with a gloomy face. Stefan looked surprised at the princess, who was clearly disappointed by something. She asked him to sit quickly by her side. There were already too many people there. And because of Stefan's silence, the room pressed on her from all sides. Dorothy wanted to talk to someone, and Stefan appeared in her room just in time. With an excited voice, she asked him to listen if he wasn't busy, and Stefan nodded in approval. The princess said she had seen a very terrifying dream, in which there was a man she loved madly. But he hated her with all his heart. He hated her so much that she finally died in his room, hanging herself and leaving her alone forever. Upon hearing the terrible dream, Stefan became visibly worried, and the princess admitted she had been thinking about it for a long time. Her birth wasn't beautiful, because she was born killing her own mother, who died immediately after her birth. And she is really bad from birth, therefore unworthy of love, and it doesn't matter how she behaves. No matter what she does, her fate is to become a real villain. The princess admitted that sometimes she is very afraid. The essence of Dorothy Millenio is evil that encompasses everything and nothing more, that she is a villain to the bone. Smiling sweetly, she asked if this was simply a childish invention or nonsense she couldn't understand. Instead of unnecessary words, Stefan hugged the princess tightly, as if he understood what she was going through. Stefan, whose heart was sensitive to others' pain, supported little Dorothy when, between tears, she shared her deepest fears with him. He said softly, "She is not evil at all, but a very kind girl. Her emotions are strong because she is very worried, but this doesn't make her evil. It makes her alive." It seemed she was doomed to loneliness, that no one could love her true self, with all her imperfections, but she really wanted to live a good life. Clara couldn't find the princess anywhere, and when she approached her room, she heard sobbing. He must really be there. Instead of the princess, she saw a young knight sitting on the floor crying bitterly, and he couldn't calm down. Upon seeing Clara, he quickly wiped his tears and lied childishly that he wasn't there at all. Although to the maid, everything was obvious, the boy was very worried. It seemed Dorothy couldn't stand him. She wasn't even happy when he appeared for an unexpected visit. She even called his arrival the worst disaster, but he was simply worried because the fool had lived there alone for several years. It's strange to worry about his younger sister, who was left alone. This is just what he has been waiting for since the first day of vacation. Apparently in Dorothy's eyes, he seemed like a real fool, Clara assured the boy, because he was studying at an elite academy where talents from all over the world gather, even though he only got 80th place out of 100 possible in the exams. Ray just wanted Dorothy to love him, but he didn't know what to do, and even Clara knew that her sister didn't answer his letters. And Dorothy would also love him if he did something she liked. Modestly, he asked the nanny if she knew what her sister liked. Dorothy loved fencing and never missed a practice. And Ray was surprised, because he was also an excellent swordsman. A few days later, a contest was held in their settlement in the Duke's name, and Clara asked how he could participate. If Ray could win, maybe his sister would recognize him and tell him how cool he was. And inspired by this idea, he asked Clara to help him enter the competition. Theon appeared in the doorway of the room and said that it seemed the princess wasn't feeling well, because even this morning, she was fluttering like a butterfly. The boys just arrived today. Clara promised to visit the princess and asked them to rest after the trip. Ray was once again worried about whether his sister was okay, and if his arrival had affected her as well. Although he was upset, he probably shouldn't have come, and Ray insisted that it was all his fault. Maybe the princess was angry because Theon had arrived without warning, and they hadn't even informed her. Thoughts didn't leave him for a second, they weren't even close. But suddenly, he noticed something on the small table near the bed. It was the same snow-white handkerchief with his initials, and for some reason, it was in plain sight. Surprisingly, the same handkerchief he gave her on the first day of their meeting was there, although he was sure that Dorothy had simply thrown it away a long time ago. It turned out that wasn't the case at all. When little Dorothy and young Theon, whose fates seemed to begin to intertwine, found themselves in the same monastery, she couldn't fall asleep. The moon showed her the way among countless twinkling lights. The breath of the breeze seemed intensified to her, full of hidden meaning. The handkerchief was firmly clutched between her fingers, simple, woven of soft fabric. It became for her more than just a piece of cloth. Dorothy looked at the embroidery, remembering how Theon, a bit embarrassed, handed it to her, how his eyes shone with a kind light. She was determined to return that scarf, symbol of their first meeting, and to do it as soon as possible. Her young heart beat unevenly, full of mixed feelings, excitement for the intimacy that had just begun with Theon, anxiety for the unknown. A sudden gust of wind, like someone's invisible hand, agitated the curtains and played with Dorothy's hair. Suddenly, it snatched the handkerchief from her weakened fingers with such force that she gasped. A small thing, but as significant to her as a bird caught in a storm current. It flew out of the open balcony. The handkerchief, Theon's gift, the only symbol of this new connection, flew irrevocably, dancing in the air before disappearing somewhere below, among the greenery of the garden. Theon found himself below under the balcony, where his handkerchief was still found, slightly crushed by the grass. He recognized it instantly. Every thread was familiar to him. His heart skipped a beat. He picked it up, feeling the slight coolness of the fabric in his palm. He will really understand that she never parted with that scarf, which was her secret treasure. A memory of him, of that first meeting. The girl got emotional and said she was going to return it and wondered what was the best way to do it. But the scarf returned to its owner. The realization that that small object, which had accidentally flown from her hands, could reveal her secret, plunged her into panic. She kept it as the most precious thing she had, not daring to even admit to herself how important it was to her. The boy, whose agility was not at all inferior to that of a forest squirrel, climbed easily up the carved supports of the balcony. In his hand, carefully folded but still retaining the warmth of her touch, was that same handkerchief. He thanked her because at least this time it hadn't flown away, and he feared that after the handkerchief had flown, she might also want to disappear again. It was Theon who always ran away from her in her past life, but now he thanked her for staying here. And Dorothy was about to burst into tears. The lady awkwardly invited Theon to her room to talk in peace, and he was very happy about it. Fearing he might fall, the princess reached out her hand to him. The wind on the edge of the balcony was so precarious. Fearing he might die in that moment, she squeezed his hand hard. The boy couldn't understand her behavior at all. Theon had wanted to ask her something for some time, and on this warm night, and quiet, he finally had a good opportunity. Theon froze in silence, tormented by the idea that Dorothy might feel like a caged bird around him. He caught in her eyes the echo of an unknown sadness, like the reflection of a storm cloud frozen over a wheat field. Of course, he couldn't know the past, what kind of relationship they had, and Dorothy replied that it was nothing like that because he was happy to see her again. The day they said goodbye, there was something he couldn't tell her. He didn't find the strength in himself. Then, at the reception, he felt incredibly regretful that he couldn't do anything about this ridiculous situation when they spilled pomegranate juice on the princess. Theon said quietly that he missed her very much. It seemed to him that the princess didn't like letters, which is why he didn't write anything. But he was very glad that now they could talk, looking into each other's eyes. It was like a beautiful dream. Theon, who had always eluded her, was now confessing his true feelings. The princess asked, surprised, by the way, what the boy was doing in the garden late at night, when everyone was already asleep. The young knight simply liked the night, its quiet calm, the twinkling stars in the sky. In fact, the princess knew he always went to bed late. He loved sleeping during the day, and very often walked at night. He handed her the handkerchief and admitted that if she really needed it, she could continue to keep it. The princess had never received gifts from Theon in the past, and pressing the handkerchief against her heart, she thanked him. After this sweet encounter, they agreed to go to sleep wishing each other good night. Little Dorothy, clutching the precious rag to her chest, felt the cold of the memory penetrate to the depths of her trembling heart. Maybe this time, everything will be different. Maybe the handkerchief isn't a seal of the past, but a key to the future, something that can heal old wounds and light a fire in her dull eyes. Squeezing the handkerchief tightly in her hands, she felt joy, but she couldn't allow herself to be truly happy. The second rule is not to look at other people's things. The throne belongs to Ray, and Theon belongs to Julia, and yet she dreamed that he would fall in love with her. Clara's strong voice echoed throughout the living room when she found out that the princess had also registered for the fencing competition. This meant that not only the princess, but also Prince Raymond would participate together. And the knight had to warn Clara. If these two turn out to be opponents, a disaster will occur. But this won't necessarily happen. The day of the competition arrived. Clara was very nervous, and Dorothy didn't expect to see her brother there. The boy was surprised that his sister hadn't come to cheer him on. He was sure that she would just watch. The princess asked Clara if she really knew everything, but the maid only found out yesterday. And Dorothy herself didn't warn her about her participation. All the blame, of course, fell on Knight Stefan, who simply had to warn Clara. But he didn't. Theon tried to calm his friend. Everything would be fine. But the young prince was simply very worried. At first, Dorothy even thought about refusing to participate, but you shouldn't give up what you want just for a brother. And there's definitely nothing wrong with that. Now that I think about it, the sister hadn't fought with Ray in a long time, and their only duel ended tragically. Clara sensed the excitement that was coming in her heart, like a bird caught in a net, fluttered with anxiety for Dorothy. The young princess was self-confident and, on the contrary, shone like the dawn, announcing a clear day. The announcement of the opponents began, and Clara prayed that in the first duel the brother and the sister wouldn't fight each other. Luckily, Dorothy had to fight Alex, and everything was distributed evenly so the older ones would move to the next round. Eden was also present at the competition, and when he saw the princess, he became very sad. Why did she come here in the first place? Her opponent was an older boy, but there was a great physical difference between them. The Duke, his father, was speaking politely with the aristocrats present, and the boy decided to approach him. He asked to change the distribution. It would be fairer to fight with boys with similar physical characteristics. It's not fair for them, who are physically very different from their opponent. If you do that, people will complain it's not interesting to watch obvious results. But Eden wanted as many people as possible to see the competitions held in his family's name. The father thought it was a brilliant idea, and for the first time praised the boy and ordered the servant to change the distribution a bit. Alex, Dorothy's opponent, was sure that his opponent was simply scared, and that he would even be embarrassed to fight such a brat. The princess was indignant, but the organizers decided to leave him alive a little longer, and he would have lost in the first round. A rude boy called Dorothy, a little thing the size of an insect, and the princess challenged him to a tournament. And after all, only bad boys fight in a place like this, and he was definitely one of them. Alex snorted like a rowdy bull, and even asked not to change his opponent under any circumstances. The announcement was made for the participants to come out on each side, and Ray was the first to come out, feeling very nervous. The excitement dissipated quickly when he saw his dear little sister in the crowd, and he was very happy. He shouted Dorothy's name, raised his hand, and was ready to start the battle. The princess, as always, reacted coldly to his nonsense. If she had waved, Ray would have been less nervous. The start of the tournament was announced. His gaze was still warrior-like, and the boy demonstrated brilliant success in fencing. Although he behaved like a little child, in important moments his gaze changed, and he became serious. Young Prince Ray burst into the arena like a whirlwind. His gaze burned with determination, like two embers in the night. Ray crossed the space like lightning, his movements as perfected as the swords of the best masters. A skillful lunge was enough, and the enemy's weapon, shining under the sun's rays like a bird in flight, appeared on the ground. Ray, a young lion, was just beginning to reveal his strength. His spirit was like a restless sea, ready to unleash a tsunami on anyone who dared to block his path. In the first duel, young Prince Ray won, waving his arms in admiration. And he looked at his little sister, full of joy for his victory. They announced the start of the second duel. This time it was the young princess's turn. Eden watched the tournament and didn't understand, because he personally asked his father to change the distribution and give the princess a different opponent. He said she came to improve her health, and that it would probably be very difficult for her to fight. What if the enemy hurts her, or, worse, she simply loses in front of everyone? Alex's opponent was completely sure of his victory and called the Princess Brat, whom he was willing to crush like a buzzing fly. It would have been better if the swords had been real, but the princess had no doubts about her victory. With the grace of a predatory cat, young Princess Dorothy began her duel with her opponent Alex in the tournament, who was confident he would win. Alex's first lunge, wide and sure, was met with cold determination. His sure movements became chaotic. The sweat that appeared on his forehead became the first sign of an inexorable defeat, and his breathing quickened, like that of a cornered animal. At that moment, when Alex, losing his balance, was trying to regain control, Dorothy dealt him the decisive blow. The audience exclaimed in admiration how incredible that girl was, but no one understood what kind of family she came from. Theon saw for the first time the fragile princess fighting with a sword, with which she skillfully defeated a strong opponent. The inspired brother didn't even know his sister was so good with the sword, and Dorothy asked him not to show they knew each other. He wanted her to be happy with him, but Dorothy again was cold and didn't accept his sincere feelings. It turns out they will have to compete together in the final, and Ray couldn't even imagine that one day he would cross swords with his sister. He was sure that there was nothing his dear little sister wasn't capable of, and no one knew she was so excellent at fencing. Dorothy and Ray advanced to the final without any problem, and the princess was already facing the semifinals. A boy who warned the princess that she definitely had to win reached the semifinals. This boy seemed familiar to her. He shouted that he would definitely win and get a prize, and they had really seen each other somewhere before. Dorothy recognized that it was the same boy who once a month expressed his gratitude, but she wondered why he was there now. The boy noticed that it seemed like Dorothy even had time to think about something else while they were fighting. He found himself trapped, and Dorothy, like an experienced hunter, was slowly cornering him. But surely, the silence that fell over the arena was deafening, and the opponent, pale as chalk, looked at the princess with eyes opened in horror and disbelief. The boy was angry. He wanted to get the main reward, which would be enough to live happily for a whole month. There are many ways to earn that amount of money without even selling one's life. But the young man was sure the girl simply didn't understand anything. If the time came when he had to give his life for money, the princess asked to find her. She admitted that she ate his gifts with great appetite and that the potatoes he brought were incredibly tasty. Only now did he realize who the girl in front of him was, and that this was the same princess who had helped cure all the people in the town. The finale that everyone was waiting for, that moment, and the brother and sister were facing each other. Who will be the hero of today's fencing competition, since only the most worthy participants have reached the final? The brother confidently asked Dorothy if she wanted to take first place in the competition, and he asked her this question for a reason. The princess understood perfectly that he wanted to give in to her, give her the victory, and she would feel like the terrible Dorothy again. The brother and sister faced each other in a duel. Dorothy was sure that everyone thought Ray would win, and she seemed like a weakling. Tired of worrying, Clara didn't even know who she should support now, and asked Stefan who he thought would win the tournament. The knight knew perfectly well that the young lady was confident in handling the sword, and showed brilliant results in the lessons. The duel with Dorothy, his older sister, was more than a simple sword fight. Like a lightning bolt, it cut through the air with silver contempt. She felt ancient wisdom awakening within her, sleeping in her veins like lava waiting for its moment. Dorothy, with a face marked by willpower, crouched down when Ray's first blow. Like a blacksmith's hammer hitting red-hot iron, it went through her arm. A pain like an icy snake coiled around her bones, numbing her fingers, and she felt her strength draining away. But Dorothy's gaze, once full of confusion, now lit up with fire. She remembered Stefan's words. Ray couldn't accept that he had hit his sister so hard, and asked worriedly if she was okay. Dorothy shouted she didn't feel any pain at all, and her stupid brother would be better off concentrating on the fight at that moment. The boy couldn't continue competing like that with his sister, who had just received a hard blow because of him. She was ready to face the new attack, to face it with all the fury and grace a warrior can muster. The young girl said confidently that she asked her brother not to give in under any circumstances, and to compete fairly. The sword she had thrown lay on the ground, like a fragment of a broken heart, a silent testimony to their discord. Her anger burned, and he, Ray, was just adding fuel to the fire. He ran after her, but every word of his seemed like a knife, ready to tear once again the thin thread that connected them. He saw her shoulders tremble, her fists clench, and his own heart sank with pain. They couldn't abandon the competition. If Dorothy gave up like that during the fight, they could get into big trouble. The princess was very angry. The boy ran after her, and she angrily shouted why he was following her. He ran after her, without looking back, and didn't even notice that he tripped over the rope that connected the heavy beams. Ray was now completely oblivious to everything. The main thing for him was to talk to his sister, and again, he was a little fool in this situation. Reacting with lightning speed, Dorothy pushed him, because the heavy log was about to fall to the ground. The blow was sudden, like a lightning bolt that pierced the innocent sky, and it seemed as if Ray's breath had been cut off. A wooden pillar fell on her. The princess froze for a moment. She felt the world around her disappearing, like ashes blown by the wind. Theon and Eden's eyes, full of concern, were mirrors reflecting the fear that had arisen deep within their souls. Fortunately, Dorothy escaped with a sprained arm, and it is unlikely that anyone could have predicted the outcome of this fight. In the worst case, she could have ended up with more than one broken arm, but she ran to save her brother. And it was better for the princess to be injured than the crown prince. Dorothy admitted who would be the right person to save if both found themselves in a situation of mortal danger. And Clara didn't understand how one could say such a thing. With Stefan, she was ready to save her, and together with the knight, they were her faithful helpers. Dorothy smiled, and although they were just words, she was genuinely grateful to Clara for her concern. After the fight, Ray couldn't calm down. He cried constantly, and now he understood why his arrival turned out to be a real disaster. Not even Theon could convince him otherwise, because the boy was sure it was better for him to stay at the academy. It was better to leave the young prince alone. Now his friend silently left his room and met another boy in the hallway. It was Eden who immediately noticed that the young knight, whom he considered his enemy, was approaching him. He greeted Theon politely and admitted he was simply thinking about the princess. Because the day the boys arrived, she had felt quite uncomfortable. He seemed to be too interested in the princess's affairs, and Theon felt that unpleasant gaze on himself. Finally, he admitted that he was really interested in the princess because he liked her a lot. Theon didn't expect such sincerity, but the boy heard that the young master had a beloved Julia, so he should understand his feelings. Strange rumors began to spread that Theon considered himself only a friend to Julia, and he stated it with certainty. The duke's maid ran out, bewildered, to tell the young knight some extremely important news. Princess Dorothy's treatment has finally ended, and she feels much better. The duke was convinced that it was all his fault. He had committed a terrible act by not asking his assistants to check the safety at the training ground. Things could have been much worse, but the duke wasn't at all happy that the princess broke her arm in the tournament held under his name. He promised that from now on such tournaments would be held exclusively under his direction, and that his assistants would carefully supervise the safety. Everything was in perfect order, and thanks to the help of the ducal family, the princess was able to quickly receive the proper treatment. Now the duke and his entourage knew who the person in front of them was, and the princess had to return. Eden was sure that Dorothy should approach him and talk to him about what happened, but she walked past him. He wanted to confess his feelings to her, express his regret, but the words stuck in his throat. He wanted to know if she was okay, and he hoped that next time she would defend herself, and not someone else. She looked great in today's competition. He wanted to say a lot, but the lady simply walked past him as if they didn't know each other at all. The setting sun sank into the horizon, tinting the clouds a soft pink, and the carriage drove away from the ducal mansion. Dorothy was only tormented by the question of why she had saved Ray, if in reality she hated him with all her soul. In that second, when he was running towards her and the pole was slowly falling, she didn't hesitate for an instant. The brother apologized, because she had been hurt because of him, and at the same time he felt guilty. Next time he asked her not to do it again, he regretted that his sister's arm had broken, and he didn't like causing her pain at all. It was precisely because the boy was so good that he could never become a great emperor, and the princess was sure that this needed to be corrected first. Ray didn't understand what she was talking about and looked at his beloved sister with a naive voice. And childish, his kindness toward her was unlimited. His love was all-consuming, and no matter how much Dorothy pushed him away, he still felt tender feelings for her. She didn't feel love even after her rebirth, so Dorothy decided to make the boy do what she told him. That night the princess couldn't sleep, and not because of her broken arm, but because of her tormenting thoughts. Clara warned that young Master Theon would return to the capital early tomorrow morning, and surprisingly, it happened too early. From the beginning, he had planned to leave as soon as he saw the Crown Prince's duel, even though they had just arrived there. This thought tormented Dorothy, and she tossed and turned in bed, unable to find a place for herself. And if they separated now, it wasn't known when they would see each other again, which is why the princess didn't like unplanned meetings. One last time before he left, she decided to be bold, just once, and now was the perfect time to do it. Today was the last day Theon would be here. All his things were already packed. He silently opened the bedroom door, placing his things near the threshold, and he was surprised when he saw the princess in front of him. Dorothy walked toward him, softly said his name, and the boy's heart began to beat incredibly fast. Actually, he was already leaving, and Clara warned him he would leave early in the morning, and that's why she came to say goodbye. Trying not to tremble and speaking softly, the young lady apologized for coming to him unexpectedly. But everything was perfectly fine. When the princess was injured, he also wanted to run straight to her to provide first aid and support. If only he had the strength, he would definitely protect the princess and was ready to continue protecting her. The boy had a great desire to gain strength quickly, and during their next meeting, he would definitely be the one who could protect her. Could it really be that same Theon she remembered, the one who was always cold to her? Of course, she wasn't against such an initiative. Hearing pleasant words, a radiant smile appeared on the young knight's face. Theon's words, like a warm breeze, caressed her soul, dispelling the clouds of doubt that had recently thickened over her heart. Every second spent by his side was worth its weight in gold. Every look full of unexpressed feelings was a precious stone she would carry with her into her solitude. Finally, she reached out mercifully and decided to ask if he and Eden were really just friends, and why they came there so often to spend time. The boy personally said that he liked the princess a lot, but from Dorothy's side, everything seemed different. She wondered if it was probably only Brant who had such feelings toward this girl, and she simply considered him an acquaintance. Theon smiled tenderly and really hoped Dorothy's hand was completely fine, that she would recover very quickly and return to her castle. His previous words, sharp as glass shards, were now replaced by soft ones, like the soft whisper of the wind, taking away her fears. They said goodbye, and that day Dorothy didn't understand if it was reality or a dream. Theon, who had always been cold in her past life, was now worried about her. The words spoken upon saying goodbye resonated in her ears like bells, announcing a new dawn, dispersing the clouds of melancholy. For some reason, as she closed her eyes, the princess felt that today she would have a wonderful dream. In the dream, she was wearing Bloody Knight's armor and hearing news about the former emperor. It was that memorable day when the emperor died, and left a will stating that the Crown Prince Raymond must be protected from Princess Dorothy. The emperor ordered that his son be protected not from the barbarians of the north or the fierce peoples of Arca, but from his own sister. So she is the enemy of the empire, the princess who went to the battlefield to protect the empire. This is incredibly funny. Dorothy fought for the empire, but the emperor ordered to protect his son and has always tried to get rid of her until the end. Some people were sure the princess had every right to become empress, and it seemed the previous emperor hadn't had any foresight. Eden whispered in her ear that it was time to drop the curtain on an era in which the spirit of light determines the future emperor. And it was Princess Dorothy who was worthy of taking the imperial throne. Supposedly, she won't have another chance unless she acts right now. Draw her sword and become a majestic empress. Raymond got everything he had with great ease, but Dorothy didn't understand why she had to endure having everything taken from her and destroyed. Raymond was always right, but why did this happen? And after these thoughts, the lady desperately decided to take the Empress's throne. Instead of allowing herself to be destroyed, she wished to destroy everything into small pieces herself. Now we will have a landscape worthy of my father's funeral, because he always dreamed of greatness and glory. The sister now knew where her brother was, as usual. He was standing near the huge window and thinking about something, and didn't even suspect what she had planned. He greeted his sister with a smile, welcomed her after the exhausting battles, and was genuinely happy to see her alive and well again. Her brother had already heard about her great victory, and even offered to organize a party in honor of this legendary event. But his sister asked him not to talk nonsense. The young man even eagerly offered to raise their glasses in honor of their deceased father. But Dorothy didn't want to get involved in that nonsense anymore. All his life, he knew that Dorothy couldn't stand their father. However, he treated her the same way, but he couldn't find an answer as to why everything turned out exactly like that with them. His sister was no longer the girl who had always worried and distressed him, and she said with certainty that she had come to kill her brother. He sincerely wished that Dorothy would never regret her choice, but she asked him to keep his regret to himself. What bothered him most was that if she decided to kill her own brother, it would be considered a rebellion. But if he killed her, everyone would praise Ray for doing the right thing to protect his throne. Even if she becomes empress, the people will condemn her for being blinded by power. On the day of her father's funeral, she brought an army to the palace and became a tyrant. And Ray wasn't surprised by this. He was a good boy from birth, and she was a true villain. Looking into her brother's eyes, she said, it was written on his face that he had no idea or suspicion of anything. Until now, he had behaved exactly like that, the kindest and noblest boy. And she had been his shadow, a pathetic piece of trash her whole life. Dorothy, whose gaze burned with the cold fire of vengeance, stood in front of Ray. Like a fury descended from heaven to punish. Her hand, gripping the hilt of the dagger, seemed carved in stone, ready to strike like lightning at the vital arteries of his existence. It wasn't just a fight, but a clash of two worlds, his world of pleas and reason, and her world of ruthless rage that consumed her like the mouth of a volcano. He asked her to withdraw before the last light, better than reason, faded from his eyes. But his words crashed against the blank wall of her hatred. Dorothy was ready to pierce his body, trample his soul, just to achieve her goal. If he wants her to give in and accept defeat, then he will have to cut off not her hair, but her head. Her own brother was in front of her, and looked at her as if he couldn't believe his sister had really come to kill him. Ray saw in her eyes a reflection of the abyss to which she intended to drag them both, an abyss that knew neither mercy nor forgiveness. Dorothy was always sure this was the only right path for them. There was no point in fighting anymore. One of them had to die, and Ray understood that he could only stop her through force, the same force that now shone in her hand. Preparing for the last and desperate dance with destiny, the first drops of blood flew in all directions, and really the stupid Ray understands that only after the death of one of them will this fight finally end. His sword, like lightning, pierced her chest and heart, that eternal beacon of kindness. It froze like a bird caught in the claws of a hunter. The eyes that had once reflected her light now burned with a strange fire. And cold, a flame of vengeance that devoured all fraternal tenderness. Now she will become the Empress. The stupid Ray, even in such a situation, showed indecision again and was simply pathetic. With a hoarse voice, before dying, he apologized for not being a good enough brother, and for it being his own sister who carried out the bloody act. The world he considered his home turned out to be just an illusion, where even blood ties could become a sword. His kind heart, that inextinguishable fire that always burned for others, was now reduced to cold ashes, swept away by the wind of betrayal. He asked his sister not to cry, and Dorothy couldn't imagine how that was possible. He did it to be happy. Every fragment of his dream that had swarmed in that kind heart was now turned to dust. The wound was an echo of unspoken words, of unrequited love that now bled with his blood. But now she was the Empress of Ubera. The young princess woke up from a nightmare covered in cold sweat and couldn't believe this had actually happened in a past life. For some reason, she suddenly clearly remembered those events when she mercilessly killed her own brother. Both then and now, Ray was exactly the same naively kind and open. If you think about it, Ray put all his sincerity into the final fight and thought about how to defeat her. It was impossible to get to the bottom of the truth. It was really her who defeated Ray, and not him who simply succumbed to her. Now she clearly saw the other side of the situation. On that terrible day, he deliberately gave his sister the chance to commit this act, desperate and without mercy. And she can believe that she defeated Ray with her own strength, and then took the imperial throne. And now all of this turned out to be a terrible lie. The other heroes had absolutely no memory. Dorothy didn't understand why only she had returned like this. The bedroom door opened silently, and behind it was her little brother, who for some reason had returned, standing hesitant. Ray thought he heard some noises coming from the room, so he decided that perhaps his sister was suffering and couldn't sleep. She tried to calm him down. None of that happened, and her hand feels much better. The boy bravely declared that he was willing to stay by her side until she fell asleep if she was sad and alone. Dorothy replied coldly again. There was no need to do that, but he himself had promised to do anything for her. She turned around. Her brother carefully covered her with a blanket and timidly asked her if she ever missed their mother. The boy still missed her. Their mother died at an early age and didn't have time to live with her children. After apologizing, Dorothy admitted that her mother died because of her, and that if it weren't for her, everything would have been fine. The brother asked surprised why she said that, and the sister explained that their mother had died during childbirth. And if she hadn't been born, the boy, their mother and the emperor would have been together, and the three of them would have lived happily their whole lives. The words made Ray nervous. He clenched his little fists and asked his sister not to say something like that again. There was a desperate excitement and concern in him, and Dorothy even turned to look him in the eyes. The brother said between sobs that he considered it a great joy to have such a wonderful sister, and beloved like her. To her, he was just a stupid older brother, but one thing she knew for sure, and he was sure of it all his life. A mother would never regret having given birth to such a beautiful daughter, who was born at the cost of her own life. They said the empress died giving birth to the princess, and it must have been a great loss for the emperor. But who would have thought? The princess looks like a true tyrant. Everyone felt sorry for the late empress, but it wasn't her fault that her mother died. It just happened. It just happened. As if his sister had saved him, and he had come to her when she couldn't sleep. She called him a stupid boy again, even though she herself had been incredibly stupid. Dorothy, wrapped in a blanket, remained silent, and her brother suddenly offered to accompany him. But she hurt her hand. Once she was injured, she had to stay on vacation, but even when her hand recovered, she promised never to go with him again under any circumstances. Ray asked quietly if it would be possible to come there another time. This was still his personal palace, a place where anyone close to the imperial palace could rest quietly and improve their health. So there was no need to ask for her permission at all, and Dorothy replied that she would think about it. Not even a minute had passed when the boy finally went silent, and it was very strange. And his silent sighs could be heard throughout the room. Leaning on her bed, the boy fell asleep very quickly. Although she had no intention of putting him to sleep in her room, he refused to leave, and while sleeping, he curled up on his sister's bed and immediately fell fast asleep. All that empty talk only managed to make her mouth ache, and Dorothy carefully covered her brother with a blanket. The boy continued muttering something while sleeping. He was always very talkative, but fortunately soon he finally went silent. Having disturbed his sister's feelings, he himself fell into a deep sleep, and Dorothy sank into deep thoughts. The question tormented her. If he hadn't died in that bloody duel, he could have lived a different life. And happy. If she had given up, hadn't killed her brother, and had believed in love and kindness, perhaps everything would have turned out differently, and that world would have been a much better place. But her hand, which had once given him comfort, on that cruel day held the steel destined to extinguish his light. The warm rays of the morning sun illuminated the room. Clara arrived to call the princess for breakfast. She saw how the brother and sister were sleeping deeply together. Although Dorothy never showed her feelings, they still had a wonderful and good relationship. That day, the young knight was in a very good mood, because finally his sister was giving him at least a drop of her attention. He served her hot tea carefully, trying not to spill a single drop, and asked for the most delicious herbs to prepare it. The tea had been steeping too long, it was too bitter for Dorothy, and her brother was willing to prepare it again and again. He happily fulfilled any of her requests, even when she felt cold. He would quickly get and bring a blanket. After that incident, he promised to do everything for her if she was in trouble or felt uncomfortable with a broken arm. Now the young master really did everything she asked him, and Dorothy didn't see in him any dignity as a crown prince who was going to become emperor. He seemed happy to fulfill her demands, and suddenly a brilliant idea came to the lady's mind. She asked for a quill and ink to be brought to her, as well as more paper, and since she had hurt her hand and couldn't write, Ray had to do it for her. At the top, in large letters on a white sheet of paper, he wrote about the study of the empire, carefully outlining each word. Dorothy dictated. The next line was written in central letters. Chapter 1, The Family Tree of the Millennial Family. She dictated a text about the emperor, the ruler of the primordial spirit of light, about the second emperor, and then about the next. The boy looked at his sister and asked her, surprised, why she suddenly wanted to write everything about the empire. But Dorothy loved to study. It was her brilliant plan. That way at least he would be occupied. And how could one study at an elite academy and do themselves the favor of learning the history of the empire? Suddenly he asked her if she had received the letters he sent her literally every week. There was still no answer, and the brother thought that maybe they hadn't managed to communicate. And he was worried that she was sad because no one was writing to her. Dorothy told the truth. All the letters arrived, and he was really worried because she was sad about being sick and alone. She admitted that that wasn't true at all. In fact, she just liked being alone, but she had never liked loneliness before. If there is someone who truly loves, they have probably never experienced intense loneliness. And even if there is no one around right now, there is always a place where you can vent your soul. If no one truly loves you, you will have to get used to living alone and not look for love in return. Each time, Ray felt that she seemed more like his older sister than his younger sister. He asked hesitatingly why stupidity displeased her so much, if she really felt such terrible hatred towards him. If she told him the truth, he was willing to correct himself in an instant and do everything possible to make their relationship warm. The boy is truly home, as if he could fix everything on his own if she tells him the whole truth. It irritated her that he was so stupidly kind. It infuriated her that only he could see the spirit of light. What she hated most was that her brother earned more than her and was always first in everything he did. It irritated her because he had died at the hands of his own sister in her past life, and he had easily forgot all those painful memories. It was his own truth, and in fact, now she couldn't even blame him. Dorothy asked him why he had given up his deserved victory during that fight. She was talking about that same duel when his victory was evident, and the prize was almost in his hands. The boy admitted that he was simply worried about her, and if the king of her memories would answer in the same way, with his stupid kindness and his naive sincerity. And it was terrifying to think what my brother saw on that last day of his life, when he was pierced by his own sister's sword. He was truly worried about her, and had no intention of giving in to her. But the girl didn't like that more and more. She honestly admitted that she hates his kindness, which permeates her entire soul, and that she carries only evil within herself. And disillusionment. Her brother still couldn't fully understand her words and motives, and if she told him everything honestly now, it would only traumatize his childish soul. She called him a little fool again. She collapsed on the bed and suggested he deal with the second page tomorrow. Ray exclaimed with joy. During the next exams, he would definitely be among the top 50 students of the academy, and he would tell her immediately. If he can do that, then he is not such a stupid child as she constantly calls him. Constantly, the sister sighed deeply before the reincarnation. Her brother had never been among the top 50, and it was simply impossible to do it. He extended his pinky finger so they could swear on their fingers, and promised that he would definitely be the average of the best students in the academy. He was ready to show his sister what he was really capable of, and learn all the lessons about the history of the empire. She extended her pinky finger and suggested Ray try, wanting to see if he could do it. The angry voice of the older brother, indignant at Eden's recent actions, was heard again in the ducal house. He was furious because the boy didn't tell him that the girl was a princess, and in fact, he simply didn't have the opportunity. The brother was sure that not everything was like that. He could have warned him behind his back, and that was really how he decided to despise him. But when Eden picked up the scattered objects, his head was simply spinning, and he stated this with confidence. His brother called him a disgusting cockroach again, like his dirty mother. But the Duchess was nearby at that moment, and heard Jonathan. He has to take care of his little brother. And the lady ordered to cancel the party to which they had already invited all their friends. Eden, with tears in his eyes, asked his mother if he really looked like a scary cockroach. She asked the boy not to take such words so to heart, but Jonathan went back to saying nonsense out of anger. The princess was injured in an incident during a fencing competition, and Jonathan was angry, wondering if he was going to tell his brother everything. Then he wanted to ask if he could visit the princess. These were commendable thoughts. The lady even asked him to go get a gift. The mother gave him permission, and the boy asked if his brother Jonathan would like to go with him. In such cases, it is considered good manners to accompany the group and greet. But Jonathan saw no point in greeting the princess, although Eden hadn't planned to go there with someone like his insolent brother from the beginning. And he definitely didn't want to show this terrible boy with whom, unfortunately, they also have family ties. Today the maid diligently prepared a vegetable soup, especially for the young lady, so that she would recover quickly. The princess would surely be happy that Clara had prepared the soup for her while she was sick, and she really wanted Dorothy to be moved. The soup was incredibly tasty, but for some reason, the maid felt that something was always missing in the flavor. The maids were busy with their daily work tasks. She wanted to ask someone, but it seemed that everyone was too busy. But she definitely needed to get someone else's opinion who would taste her soups and tell her what they were missing. Her gaze fell on Knight Stefan, who had just left the kitchen, and Clara shouted his name. Mr. Stefan didn't refuse to help her, and Clara said that she had prepared a soup especially for the princess. She asked him to taste it and answer honestly what it tasted like, so that the princess would definitely like it. Stefan, as always, remained silent and said nothing. Was the soup really so terrible that it had to be redone? The knight said that she definitely wouldn't have to make the soup again, because it was incredibly delicious. Clara hit his chest with her fist with joy and was very worried, since he was silent, if the soup was really that disgusting. A bowl of hot soup spilled into the noble knight's hands, and the maid was ready to sink into the floor. Drops of soup ran slowly down his black shirt, and Clara tried to understand how he felt after apologizing to Stefan. She carefully dried the drops with her handkerchief and promised that she would fix her terrible mistake herself. As soon as she touched his clothes, Stefan suddenly jumped and struck a pose as if he were about to fight a warrior. The chivalrous resistance, forged in battles and trials, evaporated in an instant, leaving behind only a pitiful appearance of a brave man, tripping over the huge oak table, as if stumbling over his own cowardice. He flew out of the kitchen like a bullet, leaving behind a trail of shame and bewilderment. For Stefan, this simple gesture was like an invasion, a lightning bolt that fell upon his undefeated spirit. Clara simply looked surprised at the fleeing knight and didn't understand what had just happened to him. The weather today was incredibly beautiful. Mr. Eden seemed to have promised to visit the princess. The girl was standing on the balcony and inhaling the scent of the sea when she heard the calm voice of a young knight behind her, asking for forgiveness for arriving late. He was very worried that this injury could cause problems with the effect she adored so much. Dorothy didn't break her arm, just a small sprain, so it will heal and there won't be any difference. And it won't affect her sword skills. Even so, Eden tried to show concern. The princess was still sick and needed to be more careful and take care of herself, feeling the pleasant scent of the summer flowers that constantly surrounded Eden. Even in her past life, when he was a young adult, he thought it wrong to visit the princess today empty-handed. So he prepared a small gift for her. The girl was sure that it was not necessary to bring anything, but the incident was caused by the fact that the Duke's family did not protect her enough. Eden gave Dorothy a snow-white handkerchief on its surface, smooth as a mirror. The carefully embroidered emblem of a golden sword trembled like a living being. The sword, skillfully embroidered, was a symbol of his unwavering loyalty, pure as the first snow, and sharp as a razor blade. The boy remembered well that the last gift she hadn't liked, and this time he decided to give her something more modest. He hoped that this time she would like the gift, and really wanted to see a sincere reaction in her eyes. The scarf was more than just a piece of cloth, it was a frozen song, a silent hymn to his burning heart. Usually, flowers or a bird are embroidered on the scarf, but the smaller one seemed unusual, and the heroine had the same scarf in her past lives. She asked Eden how he had managed to find such an incredible scarf, and he thought the princess liked dances, so he asked to have one made especially for her. Since he had given her a gift today, he decided to ask her something. Could he write something on the princess's cast? Well, yes, close friends often write words of support or something stupid on a cast if something is broken. So his request was not surprising, but guys like her brother were involved in similar activities. And why Eden suddenly wanted to do something like that? The princess gave her permission for this silly endeavor, and the inspired young knight brought a quill and ink. He knew that the words framed in plaster would be for her not just ink on a white canvas, but also a life-giving balm. He wanted every line he wrote to be like a drop of dew on the path to her recovery, nutritious and refreshing. Eden wrote the words, "A beautiful pearl ripening through old wounds, and shines brighter when the long, dark night ends," just for Dorothy Melanio. He had wanted to tell the princess something like that for a long time, and finally had the perfect opportunity. Dorothy laughed and asked him what he would do if she didn't allow him to write anything on her cast. But for some reason, Eden was sure that Dorothy would give him permission, and if she didn't mind, he was ready to visit her again. The lady responded with a nod, although she still didn't understand why she believed his sweet words. An entire month had already passed since this incident. The princess's hand was gradually recovering, and the lady enjoyed reading her favorite books every day. When he left, everything returned to calm and quiet. She was able to return to doing her business alone, and Clara brought a letter again today. It could be that her brother was writing her something again, but a letter arrived addressed to her from the imperial palace. The princess felt a sense of excitement, wondering if the emperor had decided to summon her. And the letter couldn't have arrived from the palace just like that. For 2 whole years, no one wrote to her except her brother, and the fool couldn't even imagine what could be written there. She read the letter slowly, and the emperor demanded that she fulfill the duties of a princess, and that she had only imagined it. It wasn't surprising the princess expected something like that from Karnan, who had never expressed any wishes to her. Someone from the Hark royal family will be in these parts soon, and wants the princess to meet them in person. Sometime after her ascension to the throne, Dorothy expanded the empire's lands to the greatest extent in history, and the main sacrificial lamb among them was Hark. The reason why Hark had to be sacrificed was very serious, but why did she do it that way? Dorothy tried to remember all the details of her past life, and finally understood what the true meaning was. It was all Eden Brandt's fault, the man who constantly told her what to do, and she listened to him blindly. The heir to the kingdom of Hark, his fiancée Monica, desperately loved Lord Eden, and dreamed that one day he would be with her. Monica's family decided on her engagement to Nerio for political reasons, and the marriage was doomed to a broken heart. Maybe everything wouldn't have been so terrible, but one day Lord Eden intervened in this relationship. And more precisely, it was his insidious plan. At the debutante ball, the lady saw for the first time a golden-eyed young man who captivated her innocent heart from the first second. It's no wonder that all the ladies adored Lord Eden and saw in him a man of angelic features and noble character. Monica, like many other aristocrats, gave her heart to this man without reservations, and believed that one day he would pay attention to her. At this ball, Eden approached the lady and confessed that it was a great honor for him to meet her, and that he had heard a lot about the Lady of Hark. In fact, he enjoyed the attention towards himself every time, and in the end, Monica announced to Nerio that she was breaking the engagement, and that she didn't want to marry without any feelings. Nerio was incredibly angry. He decided that the cause of all the problems was the arrogant Lord Eden, and after that, every time he saw him, he humiliated him and made fun of him. He called him a vile boy and of dirty origin who dared to look at another man's woman. Eden insisted that if a man like him couldn't protect the woman he loved because of his own powerlessness, then there was no point in blaming anyone else. Eden simply continued laughing. Now Hark would have a dark future, and his plans had suddenly collapsed. After this, Nerio, as soon as he ascended to the throne, immediately attacked the empire, passing over the Saritian region, which belonged to the Brandt family. Then the heroine and Eden went into battle and were able to stop him, which means that Nereus of Hark arrives here unexpectedly. After all, if you think about it, from the beginning he laughed and made fun of Ed. He spread gossip about him, and they were always implacable enemies. Dorothy had never liked him, so every time Eden answered Nereus back, she felt great satisfaction, and not at all because she was bad. They definitely shouldn't meet. The Brandt family will send Eden to events that could tarnish his honor and dignity. And even if they met one day in the future, Dorothy was now completely sane, and she was sure that nothing terrible would happen. The situation now is not the same as it was then. Maybe their relationship can improve if they create a positive image of the Brandt family and maintain good relations with Ubera. There is a third important item on the wish list for a prosperous life: save 1,000,000 people from death. And it must be possible. Maybe this will help fulfill the third number on the list of good deeds. Even if we simply improve the relationship between Eden and Nereus, several hundred people could be saved. The princess asked Clara to prepare the carriage immediately, but the maid had no idea where she had decided to go. With Dorothy's unexpected visit, she burst into the ducal castle, young Master Eden. He certainly didn't expect her to appear there. The boy seemed to be in a very good mood, and the princess told him that people from Kark were coming, and that she had to meet with the delegation. Surely at that moment, Eden would leave or hide, but suddenly he said that he would also like to greet her. The princess choked on her tea and wondered if he had just said that, and asked the boy again if he was sure of his words. She thought that his mother and father still didn't want this, but if he spoke sincerely with them, they could even have dinner together. Until now, he had never appeared at official receptions, and she had also heard that the Prince of Hark was the same age as them, and that they would definitely become friends. Dorothy couldn't let that happen. She shuddered and shouted so loud that the boy opened his eyes in surprise and asked her why she thought that. Nerio won't take it into account. An illegitimate boy who doesn't even study at an elite academy, and the Duke of Bront will regret having shown his son to the people. Dorothy knew the outcome of this situation very well. The boy would quickly suffer emotional wounds that he wouldn't forget anytime soon. Recently, Clara told me that they say a prominent astrologer has arrived in the settlement, and that she would really like to see him in person. Remembering this conversation, the princess warned that they would read her fortune with cards, and the astrologer told her that that definitely wouldn't be a good decision. She had to lie, she wasn't guessing her future herself, and one of the maids said that an exceptional astrologer had arrived, and an agreement, and supposedly, Eden's aura of death will strengthen if he meets people from Hark. And that is exactly what the card said. The boy smiled happily. The princess had even asked the astrologer about him, and that certainly meant a lot to him. Something had to be thought of urgently, so Dorothy blurted out something stupid. But there was no point in making more excuses anymore. She admitted that she had heard about Eden's aura of death and felt some discomfort in her soul, and the boy wanted to know what else she had asked. Looking at her with a loving gaze, he asked if she had really been reading the cards, and had mentioned his name. There was nothing to be done. Dorothy had nowhere else to go, and the young man warned that if the princess didn't like it, neither would he. He didn't believe in card fortune-telling, but since she wanted it, he accepted. But in return, he asked the princess to fulfill a small request for him. The princess was already anticipating strange requests, and there was talk of her official debut in high society. That was going to take place very soon. Eden asked for permission to accompany the princess as her faithful companion during the official celebration. The princess sighed deeply and understood that she couldn't refuse, but she didn't want to accept this either. Eden was a fairly intelligent boy. He had been thinking about the future for a long time, and this was really what he wanted. Before her transformation, the heroine didn't have a partner to accompany her to the debutante ball. In the palace, the position of the princess's companion was considered almost a punishment, and no one wanted to claim it. In the end, Ray recommended his friend Theon as a companion, and he couldn't refuse because it wasn't just a friendly request, but also an order from the palace. Surely, like other young men, he didn't want to dance with Dorothy. But that was when their first encounter happened that changed the princess's life. It was in that moment, seeing those bottomless scarlet eyes, that she finally fell in love with the young man, forgetting her role forever. It was this moment that was the beginning of her love for Theon, or more likely, for Theon. This very day became the beginning of misfortune. One couldn't say that on that very day she was the happiest girl in the world, even though she wasn't loved. But at least back then he didn't hate her yet. And after this, the emperor began to insist on an engagement with Theon to build a bridge in relations with Archduke Frid's family. Time flies quite fast. Eden asked the princess to promise him that she would offer him her hand on the day of her debut. A strange feeling took hold of the princess, but for her, it was better that it was him who accompanied her. Because anyway, no one would want to dance with her, and maybe she will never get engaged. Marry Theon and repeat her past destiny as a villain with unrequited love. They sealed their promise with their little fingers. The young knight was incredibly happy and wished for the happiest day of his life to arrive as soon as possible. The next day, the Hark family arrived, and the first to be introduced was Princess Dorothy Millenio, the Princess of Ubera, Nerio, from the Kingdom of Hark. He looked at the girl with disgust from the first glance. It was clear that he had no respect for her. The lady didn't need to worry. She just needed to open her heart. She needed to maintain good relations with the kingdom. And she even smiled. The boy suddenly said that she had a very pretty face, and the young woman certainly didn't expect such impudence in their first meeting. The assistant ran to the prince and told him that he shouldn't behave with such arrogance in front of the honorable princess, and that it was necessary to remain friendly. Dorothy could already imagine how she would gladly stick a sword in his stupid head. And this guy was too arrogant even for a prince. The assistant warned him that she was the princess of the empire, but the prince realized that, and still behaved as he pleased. Enormous drops of water appeared in the boy's hand, which he could easily control, and the magical powers were transmitted from generation to generation. The prince heard that this girl couldn't even control spirits, but he skillfully handled the powers of water. Dorothy knew what he meant, and this insolent fool was trying to humiliate her and prove that she didn't deserve the status of princess at all. The water spirit is a power transmitted through the pond's royal family, but the Melinio and Freed families have lost their strong connection with spirits and spellcasters throughout their long history. The Hark family still maintains close ties with them, and this is the source of this boy's arrogance towards her empire. But now Dorothy knew something, and she admitted that it was true that she couldn't communicate with spirits, and that powers weren't hereditary. There is something curious. This young Hark knows it. It's a small country, which means that the princess of the empire has the same status as the king of such a small kingdom. Even without the spirits, she could have killed him, leaving only scorched earth in his place. And it would have been better for him to learn some manners before entering the academy. The boy chuckled. She couldn't even enter epistemia, but she talks so beautifully. But he didn't know that she didn't apply herself. According to him, the excuses sounded pathetic, but at least if you only look at the diplomacy so far, it seems she was much more polite than he was. The subjects watched with bated breath while the prince and princess fought, and someone's nose was so stuck up that it could have pierced the sky. The gazes of the furious predators collided, and Dorothy confidently suggested a test. For example, basic knowledge like the influence of the movement of celestial bodies on crop yields, and the richness of the catch, and it was a shame not to know it. The princess certainly won, and this was an important question for admission to the elite academy. In the past, every time she saw Nirayusana, she just scolded or hit him. But now she has become much calmer, and the boy claimed that, in fact, there is military knowledge there. And theoretical. Dorothy suggested they take their swords and have a duel together. But the prince was more confident in his festival skills than in his theoretical knowledge. Dorothy asked him to behave politely in the future if she won. In Hark, the prince was considered a first-class swordsman and was sure that he could defeat such a thin girl with a single blow. For the first time since they took off her cast, Dorothy took a sword, but even at this level, this arrogant guy won't be able to defeat her, and he really hoped to win against the best swordswoman in the world with such terrible skills. Nerio got incredibly angry and decided to use the magic power of water, and the next moment Dorothy was spinning in a vortex of water. He laughed at the girl, telling her that she didn't even know how to handle her power and how she dared to mock him and put herself above him. Due to the strong water spirit, it was very difficult for the princess to breathe. The boy laughed. A girl was born who didn't know how to control spirits, and this is incomprehensible. He was happy. The Ubera Empire would soon be absorbed by the Hark, and he would become the greatest prince in all history. The young woman's strength was completely different. She firmly gripped the hilt of the sword to show who was truly talented here. The power of the spirits was truly enormous, and the power of Dorothy's sword was no less powerful. And she skillfully cut through the surface of the boiling water. Nerio couldn't believe it, and a fragile girl had just cut through the water with a single stroke of her sword. The magic powers weakened rapidly. Clara ran to the princess to ask if everything was okay, and that she probably needed to file an official protest before the Hark. The princess was not willing to withdraw. She moved her sword forward and ordered the boys to raise their weapons again and fight fairly. He understood that he was unlikely to win this fight and claimed that the powers of the spirits were also one of the ways to fight. The princess warned him that he could use his powers as much as he wanted, but it was unlikely he would be able to resist for long. Even without the power of the spirits, one can defeat some Hark. The blade of her sword quickly found itself near his throat. The warrior princess achieved this. Just as the prince promised, Now he is simply obligated to be polite to her and never ask her for a duel again. The maid Clara was very worried about the young lady's state, and today, when she was combing her hair, she decided to ask about her well-being. Dorothy was sitting with a sad look, speaking very little and probably thinking about the duel with the insolent prince. Clara feared that the princess was not feeling well, and it was probably worth calling a doctor to examine her. But the girl categorically refused, assuring that for her everything was fine. And Clara didn't even know how to persuade her. After this fight, the princess realized that her victory was useless. But why did she do it then? Yes, she saw a defeated brute in front of her, but she didn't even understand what exactly she wanted to get from this victory. If she really wanted to suddenly rise above other people's heads, Dorothy warned that, for a while, she shouldn't take small objects in her hands to not experience similar sensations. That same day, Eden came running to her to ask if everything was okay with the princess. And they had already told him about the duel. He apologized for bursting in so shamelessly and heard that the princess was injured, but that she was completely fine. Maybe simply because of the water spirit, the Ubera Empire will soon be absorbed by Hark. Despite having defeated this insolent prince, since he can control spirits, he will soon inherit the royal throne, and compared to him, Dorothy will not be anything of what she used to be. The excited boy took her hand and told her that everything was exactly the same as before, and that she shouldn't be so sad. She always says she feels great, even though on her face it's noticeable that it's not the case. Aiden approached the young princess tenderly, seeing how the weight of responsibilities and worries pressed on her fragile shoulders. He spoke softly, trying to calm her worries and exhaustion, reminding her that sometimes she needed to allow herself a little rest. And joy. Suddenly, the boy exclaimed, "Do you want to hear him play the violin?" And he was willing to play it for her at that very moment. He took the violin and began to play a soft melody, calm as the whisper of the wind, so that her soul could find peace and strength. In that moment, it seemed that even the most difficult worries became easier with the magical sounds of Eden's violin. The music filled the room, and the princess, closing her eyes, felt the tension slowly fade away, giving way to lightness and hope. Everyone applauded, exclaimed Clara. It seems the young knight is a true genius, and he was really a great guy. At such an early age, he already knew how to act with the talent expected of a golden-eyed angel of high society. Suddenly, that unpleasant voice, similar to Nerio's, was heard again behind the door. But why was he there? Eden noticed her agitation and asked if this was the same boy who had saddened her soul. Could it really be that he offended the young princess, and after meeting him, she feels simply terrible? It was impossible to allow these two to meet just now, and Dorothy jumped from her chair and asked Eden to hide somewhere first. This could have ended in true chaos, because Eden would now definitely begin to defend the princess's honor, and a true scandal would break out between them. She didn't even listen to his words. She asked him to go behind the curtain and warned him to sit there in silence, and that was her big request. She looked at him with a frightened and worried expression, realizing how dangerous that meeting was. And Eden, hidden in the shadow of the curtain, nodded silently in gratitude for her protection and understanding. To keep Eden behind the curtains, she asked the knight to stand next to him and protect the boy. The first to come out was the maid Clara, who angrily asked if anything had happened to the prince and why he had come there. The presumptuous boy pushed the lady and declared that he had come to speak with the princess. He was surprised that she was not injured at all, and Dorothy asked him to simply explain the essence of his visit. Unexpectedly, the prince apologized for what happened, as he used an enormous power over a common person, and ordinary, who did not know how to control spirits. Until the end, he couldn't put aside his pride, but his father, as an apology, personally invited the princess to a meal. Dorothy didn't want to go, but it was the king's invitation, and there was nothing to be done. The boy asked if she had just been playing the violin. Dorothy answered with the truth. She had never had a violin in her hands. The boy surely heard the sounds of the violin before coming in here, and Clara tried to take him away as quickly as possible. Stefan stood near the curtains, and Clara warned him that she would come a little later. Stefan had to protect the boy and fulfill his duty conscientiously. Finally, the room was empty. Everyone was outside, and Eden was able to come out of his hiding place. He only noticed that the princess behaved in an incredibly sweet way, and each time he was more surprised by her. A sumptuous dinner was served, and when the king found out that his son had threatened the princess, he admitted how uncomfortable the situation was. For this boy, the perfume was the same as hands or feet, and he hoped that Dorothy understood everything. On the young prince's part, this was called immaturity, and the king suddenly exclaimed the princess reminds him more every day of the late empress. Once before, Dorothy had seen a portrait of her mother, with scarlet lips, pink eyes and black hair. She belonged to one of the branches of Frida, so she and the body had a similar atmosphere. And for no reason, she liked the woman inside the portrait. Since the princess was healthy, but they hadn't called her back to the capital yet, she decided to refuse this in the future, even if it was an order from the emperor. It had been 2 months since there was any news from the emperor, and not even a single word of gratitude had arrived. Clara assured them that there was no need to worry, that there was nothing to worry about, and that news from the palace would probably arrive soon. An unexpected encounter occurred. The same boy to whom the princess had once told that he could go see her in person. He visited the castle. He really decided to bring his potatoes again, and the servant who grabbed the boy shouted, "This guy has forgotten his place." During the tournament, the princess herself promised for the last time that, if the moment came, he would find her. In fact, he brought another whole sack of potatoes. He proudly handed it to the princess, and falling to his knees, he asked for help. Only she can change the fate of those who are in trouble. And does Dorothy really have another opportunity to show kindness and become who she really wanted to be?